In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But before the endless conflicts that consume the galaxy, before the Imperium of Man stretched across a million worlds, there existed a singular vision of unity and conquest that would reshape the very fabric of human civilization. This vision belonged to one being alone, the Emperor of Mankind, a figure whose ambitions were as vast as the cosmos itself, and whose methods would birth both the greatest heroes and the most terrible villains the galaxy has ever known. The story of the Primarchs is not merely a tale of 20 superhuman demigods scattered across the stars. It is the chronicle of humanity's greatest triumph and most catastrophic failure. A saga that encompasses the very soul of what it means to be human in a universe that offers no mercy, no respite, and no forgiveness for weakness. Each Primarch represents not just a military commander or a genetic marvel, but an aspect of the Emperor's own psyche-made manifest, a fragment of his divine essence given form and purpose in the crucible of war. These were beings designed to be perfect generals, perfect warriors, perfect leaders of men. They were crafted with the accumulated knowledge of millennia, infused with powers that bordered on the divine, and given dominion over legions of transhuman space marines who would follow them unto death itself. Yet in their very perfection lay the seeds of their downfall, for perfection in an imperfect universe is itself a form of corruption, a hubris that the dark gods of chaos would exploit with devastating effect. The Primarchs were never meant to be merely human, yet they were cursed with human emotions, human desires, and human flaws magnified to cosmic proportions. Their loves burned with the intensity of stars, their hatreds could consume worlds, and their ambitions could reshape the very nature of reality. In them, we see reflected the best and worst of humanity itself, the capacity for nobility and sacrifice alongside the potential for betrayal and damnation. Before we delve into the individual stories of these legendary figures, we must understand the context in which they were created and the forces that shaped their destinies. The galaxy they were born into was not the ordered realm their father envisioned, but a chaotic maelstrom of competing powers, ancient evils, and cosmic horrors that had festered in the darkness between the stars for countless millennia. Into this nightmare realm, 20 infant gods were cast, each to find their own path through trials that would forge them into the weapons their father required. If you're ready to embark on this journey through the greatest saga ever told in the grim darkness of the far future, please hit that like button and subscribe to Lore of Hammer for more deep dives into the rich tapestry of Warhammer 40,000 lore. The Emperor's grand design was nothing short of the reunification of humanity under a single banner, the elimination of superstition and religion, and the establishment of a secular empire that would span the galaxy. To achieve this monumental task, he required generals who could command not just armies, but the very forces of nature itself. The Primarch project represented the pinnacle of his scientific and psychic abilities, a fusion of genetic engineering, warp manipulation, and technologies so advanced that they bordered on the miraculous. Working in the deepest laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, the Emperor labored for decades to create his sons. Each Primarch was designed with specific traits and capabilities, their genetic templates carefully crafted to fulfill particular roles in the coming Great Crusade. Some were born to be siege masters, others to excel in rapid assault or stealth operations. Some were gifted with psychic powers that could reshape reality, while others possessed an innate understanding of technology or an unshakable moral compass that would guide them through the darkest of times. The process itself remains shrouded in mystery, known only to the Emperor and perhaps a handful of his most trusted servants. What is certain is that the creation of the Primarchs required not just scientific knowledge, but a deep understanding of the warp and the fundamental forces that govern existence itself. The Emperor drew upon powers that predated human civilization, bargaining with entities whose true nature remains hidden even now, 10,000 years after the project's completion. Each Primarch was grown in a specialized gestation pod, their development carefully monitored and guided by the Emperor's will. They were not merely clones or enhanced humans, but entirely new forms of life that combined the best aspects of humanity with capabilities that transcended mortal limitations. Their bodies were designed to be virtually indestructible, capable of surviving in the vacuum of space, immune to most toxins and diseases, and possessed of strength that could shatter steel with bare hands. But it was not just their physical capabilities that set them apart. Each Primarch was gifted with an intellect that could process information at superhuman speeds, tactical genius that could comprehend the movements of entire armies across multiple theaters of war, and charisma so powerful that ordinary humans would willingly die at their command. They were living weapons, but weapons with souls, minds, and hearts that would prove to be both their greatest strength and their ultimate weakness. The scattering of the Primarchs represents one of the most pivotal moments in human history, though its true cause remains a subject of debate among Imperial scholars. What is known is that when the infant Primarchs were still developing in their gestation pods, a catastrophic event occurred that would forever alter the course of the Great Crusade and the fate of humanity itself. The most widely accepted account speaks of a massive warp storm that tore through the Emperor's laboratories, snatching the 20 incubation pods and hurling them across the galaxy to distant worlds. Some scholars believe this was the result of chaos intervention, the dark gods recognizing the threat that these beings would pose to their dominion over the galaxy. Others suggest that it was an inevitable consequence of the Emperor's tampering with forces beyond mortal comprehension, a cosmic backlash against his attempts to create beings of such power. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. 20 infant demigods were scattered across the galaxy, each landing on a different world where they would be shaped by local cultures, environments, and conflicts that the Emperor had never intended. This scattering would prove to be both a blessing and a curse, for while it denied the Emperor the perfectly controlled upbringing he had planned for his sons, it also ensured that each Primarch would develop unique perspectives and capabilities that would prove invaluable in the diverse challenges of galactic conquest. The worlds upon which the Primarchs landed were as varied as the galaxy itself. Some found themselves on civilized planets with advanced technology and stable governments, while others crashed onto death worlds where only the strongest could survive. Some were raised by loving adoptive families who nurtured their potential, while others were forced to claw their way up from the depths of society through violence and cunning. These early experiences would shape each Primarch's personality, philosophy, and approach to warfare in ways that would echo throughout their entire existence. What remained constant across all 20 worlds was the Primarch's innate superiority. Even as infants, they displayed capabilities that marked them as something beyond human. They grew at accelerated rates, learned with supernatural speed, and possessed an instinctive understanding of leadership and warfare that allowed them to rise to positions of power regardless of their circumstances. By the time the Emperor began his Great Crusade to reunite the scattered worlds of humanity, each of his lost sons had already established themselves as legendary figures on their respective worlds. The process of rediscovering and reuniting with his sons would become one of the defining aspects of the Great Crusade itself. The Emperor's psychic abilities allowed him to sense the presence of his children across the vast distances of space, drawing him inexorably toward each world where a Primarch had made their mark. These reunions were moments of profound significance, not just for the individuals involved, but for the entire course of human history. Lionel Johnson, the first Primarch, embodies the contradictions and complexities that would define his brothers throughout their existence. Found on the death world of Caliban, a planet shrouded in perpetual twilight and infested with creatures of nightmare, Lionel Johnson's early life was a crucible of survival that forged him into one of the most formidable warriors the galaxy has ever known. Yet beneath his martial prowess lay depths of secrecy and paranoia that would ultimately contribute to some of the darkest chapters in Imperial history. Caliban was a world trapped between light and darkness, both literally and metaphorically. Ancient forests covered much of the planet's surface, their canopy so thick that sunlight rarely penetrated to the forest floor. Within these shadowed depths lurked the great beasts, creatures of such malevolence and power that they had driven human civilization to the brink of extinction. The planet's inhabitants lived in fortress monasteries, their lives dedicated to an endless war against the monsters that sought to devour them. Into this world of perpetual conflict, the infant lion L. Johnson fell like a meteor from the heavens. Unlike many of his brothers who were found and raised by human families, the lion spent his earliest years alone in the deepest parts of Caliban's forests, surviving through instinct and an innate understanding of warfare that allowed him to not merely survive but thrive in an environment that would have killed any normal human within hours. The forests of Caliban were more than just a physical challenge. They were a realm where the boundary between reality and nightmare grew thin, where creatures spawned by humanity's darkest fears stalked through shadows that seemed to move with malevolent intelligence. The lion learned to navigate this treacherous landscape with a skill that bordered on the supernatural, developing an intuitive understanding of his enemies' weaknesses and an ability to strike from concealment that would later earn him renown as one of the Imperium's greatest tactical minds. When Luther, a knight of the Order, finally discovered the young Primarch, he found not a wild child, but a being of such obvious nobility and power that even the hardened warriors of Caliban recognized him as something beyond their understanding. The lion's integration into human society was swift but never complete. He possessed an aloofness and reserve that set him apart from even his closest companions, a tendency toward secrecy that would become both his greatest strength and his most dangerous weakness. Under Luther's tutelage, Lion L. Johnson learned the arts of civilization alongside the skills of war. He mastered the use of weapons and armor, studied the histories and traditions of Caliban's knightly orders, and developed the strategic acumen that would later make him one of the Emperor's most trusted generals. Yet even as he embraced the role of a knight and leader, the lion retained something of the wild creature he had been in the forests, a predatory instinct and an ability to see through deception that made him uniquely suited to the brutal realities of warfare in the 31st millennium. The lion's rise to prominence on Caliban was meteoric. His tactical genius and personal prowess in battle quickly established him the greatest knight of his generation, and his campaigns against the great beasts became the stuff of legend. He possessed an uncanny ability to predict his enemies' movements, to strike at their weaknesses with surgical precision, and to inspire his followers to feats of heroism that seemed impossible. Under his leadership, the Knights of Caliban began to push back the darkness that had plagued their world for millennia. But it was not just his military achievements that set the lion apart, it was his character, a complex mixture of nobility and ruthlessness that reflected the dual nature of his upbringing. He was capable of great compassion and loyalty, forming deep bonds with those he trusted. Yet he was also willing to make the hard choices that others could not, to sacrifice individuals for the greater good without hesitation or regret. This duality would define his entire existence, making him both one of the most effective Primarchs and one of the most isolated. When the Emperor finally arrived on Caliban, he found a world transformed. The great beasts that had once terrorized the planet's inhabitants were either dead or driven into the deepest recesses of the forests, and the knightly orders had united under the lion's leadership into a force capable of bringing order to their entire world. The reunion between father and son was a moment of profound significance, not just for the individuals involved, but for the future of the Great Crusade itself. The lion's integration into the broader imperial war machine was seamless in some ways and problematic in others. His tactical genius and the prowess of his Dark Angels Legion made them one of the most effective forces in the Emperor's arsenal, capable of undertaking the most challenging campaigns with a success rate that bordered on the miraculous. Yet the lion's secretive nature and tendency to operate independently often put him at odds with his brothers and the broader Imperial command structure. The Dark Angels under Lion L. Johnson became known for their ability to appear where they were least expected, to strike decisive blows against enemies who thought themselves safe, and to achieve victory through methods that others might consider underhanded or dishonorable. The Lion cared nothing for glory or recognition, he cared only for results, for the advancement of the Emperor's vision of human unity, and for the protection of those under his command. This pragmatic approach to warfare would serve the Lion well during the Great Crusade, but it would also plant the seeds of future tragedy. His willingness to keep secrets, to operate outside normal command structures, and to make decisions based on information that he shared with no one else would ultimately contribute to the divisions that would tear the Imperium apart during the Horus Heresy. The Lion's greatest strength, his ability to see clearly through deception and confusion, would become a source of paranoia and mistrust that would haunt him for the rest of his existence. Fulgrim, known as the Phoenician, represents perhaps the most tragic fall from grace among all the Primarchs, a being whose pursuit of perfection led him down a path of corruption so complete that it serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and pride. His story is one of transformation, not just from loyalty to treachery, but from the highest ideals of human achievement to the depths of hedonistic excess and moral decay. The world of Chemos, where Fulgrim's pod came to rest, was a planet dying a slow death from industrial pollution and resource depletion. Once a thriving center of manufacturing and culture, Chemos had been reduced to a toxic wasteland where the surviving population struggled to maintain even the most basic technologies necessary for survival. Into this environment of decline and desperation, the infant Primarch brought hope and the promise of renewal. Fulgrim's early life on Chemos was marked by an almost supernatural ability to inspire others and to see potential where others saw only decay. Even as a child, he possessed an aesthetic sense that bordered on the divine, an understanding of beauty and proportion that allowed him to transform the ugliest industrial facilities into works of art. His adoptive family, workers in one of Chemos's failing factories, quickly recognized that their foundling was something extraordinary, a being whose very presence seemed to elevate everything around him. The young Primarch's influence on Chemos society was profound and immediate. He possessed an intuitive understanding of both technology and human psychology that allowed him to not only repair the planet's failing infrastructure, but to redesign it in ways that were both more efficient and more beautiful. Under his guidance, the factories of Chemos were transformed from grimy industrial complexes into gleaming monuments to human achievement. Their production lines reorganized to eliminate waste and maximize both output and worker satisfaction. But Fulgrim's greatest gift was not his technical knowledge or his aesthetic sense. It was his ability to inspire others to exceed their own limitations, to strive for a perfection that they had never imagined possible. He preached a philosophy of constant improvement, of never accepting mediocrity or settling for good enough when excellence was within reach. This philosophy would become the defining characteristic of both Fulgrim himself and the Emperor's Children Legion that would eventually serve under his command. The transformation of Chemos under Fulgrim's leadership was nothing short of miraculous. Within a few decades, the dying world had been reborn as a center of culture and industry that rivaled the greatest achievements of the Dark Age of technology. The planet cities became showcases of architectural beauty, their spires reaching toward the heavens like prayers made manifest in stone and steel. The factories that had once belched toxic smoke into the atmosphere now produced goods of such quality and beauty that they were sought after across entire star systems. Fulgrim's personal development during this period reflected the broader transformation of his world. He became not just a leader, but an artist, a philosopher, and a warrior whose every action was guided by an uncompromising pursuit of perfection. He mastered every skill he attempted, from swordsmanship to sculpture, from military strategy to musical composition. His very presence seemed to elevate those around him, inspiring them to achieve heights they had never thought possible. When the Emperor arrived on Chemos, he found a world that had achieved something approaching utopia through the efforts of a single individual. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect. The Emperor saw in Fulgrim a reflection of his own highest aspirations for humanity, while Fulgrim recognized in his father the ultimate embodiment of the perfection he had spent his life pursuing. The integration of Fulgrim into the Great Crusade was seamless and spectacular. The Emperor's Children Legion, already known for their discipline and martial prowess, was transformed under their Primarch's leadership into something approaching a work of art in its own right. Every aspect of their organization, from their battle tactics to their ceremonial uniforms, was refined to a degree that bordered on the obsessive. They became known not just for their effectiveness in battle, but for the beauty and precision with which they conducted their campaigns. Fulgrim's approach to warfare was unique among the Primarchs in that he viewed each battle an opportunity for artistic expression. His strategies were not just effective but elegant, his victories achieved through methods that demonstrated not just tactical genius but aesthetic sensibility. The Emperor's children under his command became masters of the perfect assault, the flawless defense, and the precisely timed maneuver that would achieve maximum effect with minimum waste. The Primarch's personal relationships with his brothers were complex and often strained by his perfectionist nature. While he genuinely sought to help them improve and achieve their own potential, his constant suggestions and critiques were often perceived as condescension or arrogance. Fulgrim could not understand why others would not embrace the same pursuit of perfection that drove him, and his inability to accept anything less than excellence in himself or others created tensions that would have far-reaching consequences. The seeds of Fulgrim's eventual corruption were present from the very beginning, though they remained hidden beneath his noble intentions and genuine desire to serve the Emperor's vision. His pursuit of perfection was not just a philosophy, but an obsession, a need that grew stronger with each achievement and could never be fully satisfied. This hunger for ever greater heights of accomplishment made him vulnerable to influences that promised knowledge and experiences beyond anything the material universe could provide. The discovery of the Lar civilization would prove to be the turning point in Fulgrim's story, the moment when his pursuit of perfection would be twisted into something dark and terrible. The Lar were an ancient Xenos race whose entire culture was built around the pursuit of sensation and experience. Beings who had achieved a form of immortality through their mastery of technologies that blurred the line between science and sorcery. Their weapons and artifacts were things of terrible beauty, objects that promised their wielders access to sensations and abilities beyond mortal comprehension. When Fulgrim claimed the Lar blade known as the Anathema, he believed he was simply adding another perfect weapon to his collection, another tool that would help him achieve even greater heights of martial prowess. He could not have known that the blade was more than just a weapon. It was a conduit for the influence of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess and perfection, an entity that had been watching the Phoenicians rise with growing interest and hunger. The corruption of Fulgrim was not a sudden transformation, but a gradual process, a slow erosion of his moral foundations that began with small compromises and escalated into complete damnation. The demon within the Lar blade whispered to him of greater perfections, of experiences and sensations that would elevate him beyond the limitations of his current existence. It promised him knowledge of arts and sciences that would make his previous achievements seem like the crude scratchings of a child. At first, Fulgrim resisted these whispers, recognizing them as temptations that would lead him away from his duty to the Emperor and the Imperium. But the demon was patient and cunning, appealing not to his base desires, but to his highest aspirations. It convinced him that true perfection could only be achieved by exploring every aspect of existence, by experiencing every sensation and emotion to their fullest extent. It argued that his current limitations were artificial constraints that prevented him from achieving his true potential. The fall of Fulgrim accelerated during the events leading up to the Horus Heresy, as the demon's influence grew stronger and his ability to resist its whispers weakened. He began to experiment with Forbidden's knowledge and practices, justifying each transgression as necessary for his continued growth and development. His pursuit of perfection became a pursuit of excess, his desire for beauty became a hunger for sensation, and his love for his brothers became a willingness to corrupt them in the name of sharing his newfound enlightenment. The final transformation of Fulgrim from Loyal Son to Demon Prince was completed during the Drob Site Massacre on Istvan V, where he personally slew his brother Ferus Manus in single combat. This act of fratricide was not just a betrayal of his loyalties, but a fundamental violation of everything he had once stood for, a moment when his pursuit of perfection was revealed to be nothing more than an elaborate justification for the most base and terrible desires. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, stands as perhaps the most bitter and resentful of all the Primarchs, a being whose genius for siege warfare and technological innovation was matched only by his capacity for grudges and his perception of constant slights and injustices. His story is one of a brilliant mind trapped by its own limitations, a master craftsman whose greatest works were always overshadowed by the achievements of others, and a loyal son whose service was never properly recognized or rewarded. The world of Olympia, where Perturabo's pod crashed, was a planet of city-states locked in perpetual warfare, their conflicts driven by political ambitions and resource competition that had raged for millennia. The planet's culture was one that valued intellectual achievement and artistic expression alongside martial prowess, creating an environment where a being of Perturabo's capabilities could develop multiple aspects of his superhuman potential. Perturabo's early life was marked by an almost supernatural understanding of mathematics, engineering, and the fundamental principles that govern the physical universe. Even as a child, he could visualize complex mechanical systems in his mind, understanding their operation and potential improvements with a clarity that amazed even the most learned scholars of Olympia. His adoptive father, Damikos, recognized the boy's extraordinary gifts and provided him with the best education available, though even the most advanced tutors on Olympia could teach him little that he had not already intuited through his own observations. The young Primarch's relationship with his adoptive family and the broader society of Olympia was complicated by his awareness of his own superiority and his growing frustration with the limitations of those around him. He could see solutions to problems that others could not even comprehend, design technologies that were centuries ahead of anything his world had achieved, and develop strategies that could end the planet's endless conflicts in a matter of months. Yet his suggestions were often dismissed or ignored, his innovations were frequently misunderstood or misapplied, and his attempts to bring order to Olympia's chaotic political situation were met with suspicion and resistance. This pattern of unrecognized genius and unappreciated effort would define Perturabo's entire existence, creating a deep well of resentment that would color every aspect of his personality and decision-making. He began to see himself as a figure of tragic nobility, a being of superior intellect and capability who was condemned to serve lesser minds that could never truly understand or appreciate his contributions. This perception was not entirely inaccurate. Perturabo was indeed one of the most brilliant tactical and technical minds among the Primarchs, but his inability to communicate effectively with others and his tendency to assume malicious intent behind every slight made it impossible for him to build the relationships necessary to achieve his goals. The Iron Warriors Legion that would eventually serve under Perturabo's command reflected their Primarch's strengths and weaknesses in equal measure. They became masters of siege warfare, capable of reducing the most formidable fortifications through a combination of superior technology, meticulous planning, and an almost mechanical precision in execution. Their campaigns were models of efficiency and effectiveness, achieving victory through methods that minimized casualties among their own forces while maximizing damage to their enemies. Yet the Iron Warriors were also known for their coldness and their willingness to accept massive casualties in pursuit of their objectives. Perturabo's approach to warfare was fundamentally utilitarian. He viewed his soldiers as tools to be used in the most efficient manner possible, and he had little patience for concerns about morale or individual welfare that might interfere with the achievement of strategic goals. This attitude made his legion highly effective, but also deeply unpopular among other Imperial forces who viewed the Iron Warriors as callous and inhumane. Perturabo's relationship with his brother Primarchs was marked by professional respect, but personal animosity. He recognized the capabilities of his siblings and was willing to work with them when necessary, but he could never escape the feeling that his own contributions were undervalued while theirs were celebrated beyond their actual merit. His particular rivalry with Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, became legendary throughout the Imperium, a competition between two masters of fortification and siege warfare that would ultimately have tragic consequences for both. The source of Perturbo's resentment toward Dorn was not just professional jealousy, but a fundamental difference in how they were perceived and utilized by the Emperor and the broader Imperial command structure. While Dorn was celebrated as the Praetorian of Terra, the defender of the Imperial Palace and the Emperor's most trusted architect, Perturbo was assigned the thankless task of reducing enemy fortifications and conducting the grinding campaigns that others found too difficult or too costly. His victories were seen as inevitable given his capabilities, while his failures were scrutinized and criticized in ways that his more celebrated brothers never experienced. This pattern of assignment to the most difficult and unrewarding campaigns created a cycle of bitterness that grew stronger with each passing year of the Great Crusade. Perturbo began to see himself as the Emperor's workhorse, a tool to be used for the most unpleasant tasks, while others received the glory and recognition that he felt he deserved. His requests for different assignments were ignored or denied. His suggestions for strategic improvements were dismissed, and his warnings about the psychological toll that constant siege warfare was taking on his legion were met with indifference. The breaking point came during the campaign on Olympia, when Perturbo was forced to return to his homeworld to suppress a rebellion that had erupted in his absence. The sight of his adoptive people in revolt against the Imperium he had served so faithfully was a devastating blow to his already fragile psyche, a final confirmation that his efforts and sacrifices had been meaningless. His response was swift and terrible. He ordered the complete destruction of Olympia's population, turning his homeworld into a lifeless monument to his rage and disappointment. This act of genocide marked the point of no return for Perturbo, the moment when his resentment and bitterness finally overcame his loyalty to the Emperor and the Imperium. When Horus approached him with promises of recognition and respect, with assurances that his genius would finally be properly appreciated and rewarded, the Lord of Iron was ready to listen. His decision to join the rebellion was not driven by any particular ideology or belief in chaos, but by a simple desire for the acknowledgement and respect that he felt had been denied to him for too long. During the Horus Heresy, Perturbo proved to be one of the most effective commanders in the War Master's arsenal, his siege warfare expertise proving crucial in several key campaigns. Yet even in rebellion, he remained fundamentally unchanged, still brilliant, still bitter, and still convinced that others received credit for achievements that were rightfully his. His ultimate fate ascending to demon princehood in service to chaos was perhaps inevitable given his character and the choices he had made, but it represented a tragic waste of one of the most capable minds the Imperium had ever produced. Jaghatai Khan, the Warhawk of Kogoris, embodies the spirit of freedom and the wild joy of the hunt that stands in stark contrast to the rigid discipline and grim duty that characterizes many of his brother Primarchs. His story is one of a being who never lost touch with his humanity despite his superhuman capabilities, a leader who understood that true strength comes not from control, but from the willing loyalty of those who choose to follow. The world of Kogoris, known to its inhabitants as Mudus Planus, was a planet of vast steppes and endless skies, where nomadic tribes followed the great herds across grasslands that stretched beyond the horizon. It was a world where speed and mobility were the keys to survival, where the ability to strike swiftly and disappear into the vastness of the plains meant the difference between life and death. Into this environment of constant movement and fierce independence, the infant Primarch felt like a star from the heavens. Jaghatai's early life among the tribes of Kogoris shaped him in ways that would define his entire existence. Unlike many of his brothers who were raised in civilized societies with complex hierarchies and rigid structures, the Khan learned the values of the steppes, honor, loyalty, and the importance of personal freedom. He was adopted by Khan, a tribal leader who recognized the child's extraordinary nature, but who also understood the importance of allowing him to develop according to his own inclinations rather than trying to force him into a predetermined mold. The culture of Kogoris was one that valued individual excellence while maintaining strong bonds of tribal loyalty. Warriors were expected to prove themselves, their personal achievement and courage, but they were also required to subordinate their individual desires to the needs of the tribe when necessary. This balance between personal freedom and collective responsibility would become a defining characteristic of Jagatai's leadership style and would influence the way he commanded both his tribal followers and later his Space Marine Legion. The young Primarch's rise to prominence on Kogarus was swift, but not without challenges. His superhuman capabilities made him a formidable warrior and hunter, but his true genius lay in his ability to unite the fractious tribes of the steppes under a single banner without destroying the independence and cultural identity that made them strong. He understood that true leadership was not about imposing one's will through force, but about inspiring others to willingly follow a shared vision. Jagatai's campaigns to unite Kogarus were masterpieces of mobile warfare, utilizing the speed and flexibility of mounted warriors to achieve victories that seemed impossible through conventional tactics. He pioneered techniques of rapid deployment and hit-and-run warfare that would later be adapted for use by his Space Marine Legion, proving that mobility and surprise could often achieve what brute force could not. His armies moved like the wind across the steppes, appearing where they were least expected and disappearing before their enemies could mount an effective response. The Khan's philosophy of warfare was fundamentally different from that of many of his brothers. While others sought to crush their enemies through overwhelming force or superior technology, Jagatai preferred to outmaneuver and outthink his opponents, using their own strengths against them and exploiting weaknesses that they did not even know they possessed. He understood that the greatest victories were often achieved not through the destruction of one's enemies, but through their conversion into allies or their neutralization as threats. When the Emperor arrived on Kogarus, he found a world that had achieved unity without sacrificing the diversity and independence that made its people strong. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual respect and understanding, though the Khan's free-spirited nature and tendency toward independence would sometimes put him at odds with the more rigid structures of the imperial military hierarchy. The White Scar's Legion under Jagatai's command became known throughout the Imperium for their speed, their unpredictability, and their ability to achieve victory through methods that others considered unconventional or even reckless. They specialized in rapid assault tactics, using bikes and land speeders to achieve the same kind of mobility that their Primarch had mastered on the steppes of Kogarus. Their campaigns were characterized by swift strikes against enemy weak points, followed by equally rapid withdrawals that left their opponents confused and demoralized. The Khan's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, though his independent nature and tendency to operate outside normal command structures sometimes created tensions. He had particular respect for those brothers who shared his appreciation for personal freedom and individual excellence, while maintaining a healthy skepticism toward those who seemed eager to embrace rigid hierarchy or absolute authority. His loyalty to the Emperor was unquestioned, but it was a loyalty freely given rather than blindly imposed. During the Horus Heresy, Jagatai Khan found himself in a unique position among the Primarchs. His legion's mobility and independence had kept them largely separate from the main theaters of the conflict, giving him time to evaluate the situation and choose his side based on careful consideration rather than immediate emotional response. His decision to remain loyal to the Emperor was not made lightly, but once made, it was absolute and unwavering. The Khan's contributions to the defense of Terra during the final stages of the heresy were crucial, his mobile tactics proving invaluable in the chaotic urban warfare that characterized the siege of the Imperial Palace. His ability to appear where he was most needed, to strike decisive blows against enemy forces, and to coordinate with other loyal forces while maintaining his own tactical flexibility made him one of the most effective defenders of humanity's birthworld. The White Scars under Jagatai's leadership demonstrated that loyalty and effectiveness did not require the abandonment of cultural identity or personal freedom. They proved that a force could be both disciplined and independent, both reliable and unpredictable, both part of a larger whole and true to their own unique character. This balance would become increasingly important in the post-heresy Imperium, where the need for unity had to be balanced against the recognition that diversity of thought and approach was often humanity's greatest strength. Jaghatai Khan's ultimate fate remains shrouded in mystery. His disappearance into the webway during a campaign against the Dark Elder, leaving his sons and the broader Imperium to wonder whether the Warhawk still hunts among the stars or has found some other path through the cosmic wilderness. His legacy lives on in the White Scars chapter and their successors, who continue to embody the values of speed, independence, and fierce loyalty that their Primarch exemplified throughout his existence. Lemon Russ, the Wolf King of Fenris, represents the primal fury and untamed savagery that lurks beneath the veneer of human civilization, a being who embraced his bestial nature while never losing sight of his fundamental humanity. His story is one of contradictions: a savage who was also a philosopher, a barbarian who understood the subtleties of politics and warfare, and a loyal son who was willing to challenge even the Emperor himself when he believed it was necessary. The world of Fenris, where Russ's pod came to rest, was a death world of ice and fire, where massive continents drifted across seas of magma, and the very planet seemed determined to kill anything foolish enough to try to survive on its surface. The human tribes that had managed to establish themselves on Fenris were among the hardiest in the galaxy, their entire culture built around the concept of survival through strength and the acceptance of death as a constant companion. The infant Primarch was discovered by a pack of Fenrisian wolves, creatures whose intelligence and loyalty had made them the companions and partners of the planet's human inhabitants for countless generations. Raised among these magnificent beasts, Russ learned lessons about pack loyalty, territorial defense, and the importance of establishing clear hierarchies through displays of strength and dominance. These early experiences would shape his understanding of leadership and his approach to both warfare and politics throughout his existence. When Russ was eventually found and adopted by the tribe of Venger, he had already developed many of the characteristics that would define him, both a Primarch and a leader. He possessed an intuitive understanding of group dynamics and pack behavior that allowed him to quickly establish himself the dominant figure in any gathering. But he also demonstrated a fierce loyalty to those he considered part of his pack and an unwavering commitment to protecting the weak and innocent. The culture of Fenris was one that valued courage, loyalty, and personal honor above all else, but it was also a culture that understood the importance of cunning and adaptability in the face of overwhelming odds. The planet's harsh environment had taught its inhabitants that survival often required the ability to think quickly and act decisively, to recognize when direct confrontation was appropriate and when more subtle approaches were necessary. These lessons would serve Russ well throughout his career as both a tribal leader and a Primarch. Russ's rise to prominence on Fenris was marked by a series of legendary exploits that established him the greatest warrior and leader the planet had ever known. His campaigns to unite the fractious tribes under his banner were characterized by a combination of overwhelming personal prowess and shrewd political maneuvering that demonstrated his understanding of both the carrot and the stick. He could inspire fierce loyalty through his courage and charisma, but he was also willing to use force when necessary to bring recalcitrant tribes into line. The Wolf King's approach to warfare was fundamentally different from that of many of his brothers, reflecting both his upbringing among the wolves of Fenris and his deep understanding of human psychology. He recognized that fear could be as effective a weapon as any blade or bolter, and he cultivated an image of savage ferocity that often caused his enemies to break and run before battle was even joined. Yet beneath this carefully constructed facade of barbarism lay a keen tactical mind that could adapt to any situation and exploit any weakness. When the Emperor arrived on Fenris, he found a world that had achieved a form of unity through the personal charisma and military genius of a single individual. The reunion between father and son was marked by the famous contest between them, a test of strength and will that established the parameters of their relationship and demonstrated that Russ's loyalty, while absolute, would never be blind or unquestioning. The Space Wolves Legion under Russ's command became known throughout the Imperium the Emperor's executioners, the force that was called upon when other Space Marines had failed, or when the situation required a level of savagery that more civilized forces could not provide. They specialized in close-quarters combat and shock assault tactics, using their fearsome reputation and overwhelming aggression to break enemy morale before engaging in the kind of brutal melee combat that was their specialty. The Wolf King's relationship with his brother Primarchs was complex and often strained by his tendency to speak his mind regardless of the consequences. He had little patience for what he saw as pretension or false nobility, and he was quick to challenge any brother who he believed was putting on airs or failing to live up to their responsibilities. His particular rivalry with Magnus the Red would have tragic consequences for both legions and for the Imperium as a whole. The conflict between Russ and Magnus represented a fundamental philosophical divide about the nature of power and the proper limits of human ambition. Russ viewed the Thousand Sons' use of psychic powers with deep suspicion, seeing it as a dangerous flirtation with forces that could not be controlled or trusted. His warnings about the dangers of sorcery were dismissed by many as the superstitions of a barbarian, but events would prove that his instincts were more accurate than the learned theories of his more educated brothers. The destruction of Prospero and the scattering of the Thousand Sons represented both the greatest triumph and the greatest tragedy of Russ's career. His successful execution of the Emperor's orders demonstrated his absolute loyalty and the effectiveness of his legion, but the manipulation of those orders by Horus and the ultimate corruption of Magnus showed that even the Wolf King could be used as a tool by those clever enough to exploit his straightforward nature. During the Horus Heresy, Russ and his Space Wolves proved to be among the most effective Loyalist forces, their savage reputation and proven loyalty making them invaluable in the desperate struggle to preserve the Imperium. The Wolf King's understanding of his role as the Emperor's executioner extended to his willingness to take on the most unpleasant tasks, to make the hard choices that others could not, and to bear the burden of actions that were necessary but not necessarily honorable. The ultimate fate of Lemon Russ remains one of the great mysteries of the Imperium. His disappearance into the Eye of Terror in pursuit of a cure for the Emperor's condition, leaving his sons to wonder whether their Primarch still hunts among the stars or has found his final rest in the realm of chaos. His legacy lives on in the Space Wolves chapter and their successors, who continue to embody the values of loyalty, courage, and fierce independence that their Primarch exemplified throughout his existence. Rogel Dorn, the Praetorian of Terra, stands as perhaps the most steadfast and reliable of all the Primarchs, a being whose unwavering loyalty and defensive genius made him the Emperor's most trusted guardian and the architect of humanity's greatest fortress. His story is one of duty fulfilled regardless of personal cost, of sacrifices made without complaint or expectation of reward, and of a character so fundamentally honorable that it became both his greatest strength and his most exploitable weakness. The world of Inuit, where Dorn's pod came to rest, was a harsh ice world where survival required careful planning, meticulous preparation, and an absolute commitment to duty and to responsibility. The planet's inhabitants had developed a culture that valued stoicism, reliability, and the kind of methodical approach to problem solving that could mean the difference between life and death in an environment that offered no margin for error. Dorn's early life on Inuit was marked by his rapid rise through the ranks of the planet's military hierarchy, his natural leadership abilities and tactical genius quickly establishing him one of the most capable commanders in Inuit's history. Unlike many of his brothers, who achieved prominence through dramatic displays of individual prowess, Dorn's reputation was built on consistent success, reliable performance, and an ability to inspire confidence in those under his command through his own unshakable composure. The culture of Inuit emphasized the importance of preparation, planning, and the careful consideration of all possible contingencies before taking action. These values would shape Dorn's approach to warfare and leadership throughout his existence, making him perhaps the most methodical and systematic of all the Primarchs. He understood that victory was not achieved through inspiration or individual heroics alone, but through the careful coordination of resources, the proper training of personnel, and the construction of systems that could function effectively even under the most adverse conditions. Dorn's genius lay not in innovation or creativity, but in his ability to take existing concepts and refine them to a degree of perfection that others could not achieve. His fortifications were not revolutionary in their design, but they were so well constructed and so thoroughly planned that they became virtually impregnable. His military strategies were not particularly original, but they were executed with such precision and attention to detail that they achieved results that more creative approaches could not match. When the Emperor arrived on Inuit, he found a world that had achieved stability and prosperity through the application of sound principles and careful management. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect, the Emperor seeing in Dorn the kind of reliable, trustworthy subordinate that would be essential to the success of the Great Crusade, while Dorn recognized in his father the ultimate authority to whom his absolute loyalty was owed. The Imperial 5th Legion under Dorn's command became known throughout the Imperium, the most reliable and disciplined force in the Emperor's arsenal. They specialized in siege warfare, defensive operations, their methodical approach to combat, and their absolute refusal to retreat or surrender, making them the ideal choice for the most challenging and important assignments. Their fortress monasteries became models of defensive architecture. Their training regiments became the standard by which other legions measured their own preparedness. Dorn's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, though his straightforward nature and tendency to speak bluntly sometimes created tensions with those who preferred more diplomatic approaches. He had particular respect for those brothers who shared his commitment to duty and reliability, while maintaining a healthy skepticism toward those who seemed more interested in personal glory than in the achievement of strategic objectives. The appointment of Dorn as the Praetorian of Terra, responsible for the defense of the Imperial Palace and the Emperor's personal safety, was a recognition of his unique qualifications for the role. His defensive genius, his absolute loyalty, and his methodical approach to problem-solving made him the ideal choice for a position that required not just military skill, but also the kind of character that could be trusted with the most important responsibilities in the Imperium. The fortification of Terra under Dorn's supervision represented the culmination of his career as a defensive architect and military engineer. The palace walls that he designed and constructed were not just physical barriers, but symbols of the Imperium's determination to survive and prosper despite the threats that surrounded it. Every aspect of the defenses was carefully planned and meticulously executed, creating a fortress that could withstand even the most determined assault. During the Horus Heresy, Dorn's role as the defender of Terra put him at the center of the conflict that would determine the fate of humanity. His preparations for the siege, his coordination of the Loyalist forces, and his personal leadership during the most critical moments of the battle demonstrated the qualities that had made him the Emperor's most trusted guardian. His willingness to sacrifice everything, including his own life, in defense of his father and the Imperium exemplified the kind of loyalty and dedication that defined his character. The aftermath of the heresy saw Dorn struggling to come to terms with the changes that the conflict had brought to the Imperium and his own role within it. His resistance to the Codex Astartes and the division of the legions reflected not just his attachment to tradition, but his understanding that the unity and strength that had made the Great Crusade possible were being sacrificed in the name of preventing future rebellions. Dorn's ultimate fate, his disappearance during a campaign against Chaos forces, and the recovery of only his skeletal hand, remains one of the great mysteries of Imperial history. His legacy lives on in the Imperial 5th chapter and their successors, who continue to embody the values of duty, loyalty, and steadfast determination that their Primarch exemplified throughout his existence. Conrad Kurz, known as the Night Haunter, represents the darkest aspects of justice and the terrible price of maintaining order through fear and brutality. His story is one of a being who saw too clearly the corruption and evil that lurked in the hearts of men, whose attempts to create a better world through terror and violence ultimately corrupted him into the very thing he had sought to destroy. The world of Nostromo, where Kersey's pod crashed, was a planet shrouded in perpetual darkness, its surface lit only by the hellish glow of industrial fires and the sickly luminescence of chemical pollution. It was a world where crime and corruption had become so endemic that they were simply accepted as natural parts of existence, where the strong preyed upon the weak without consequence, and where justice was nothing more than a word used to justify the actions of those with power. Into this nightmare realm, the infant Primarch fell like a dark angel of vengeance, his very presence seeming to embody the concept of retribution made manifest. Unlike many of his brothers who were found and raised by loving families, Curse spent his early years alone in the depths of Nostromo's criminal underworld, surviving through a combination of superhuman capabilities and an intuitive understanding of fear and intimidation that allowed him to not just survive but thrive in an environment that would have destroyed any normal human. The young Primarch's development was shaped by constant exposure to the worst aspects of human nature, creating a worldview that was fundamentally pessimistic about the possibility of redemption or genuine reform. He saw corruption and evil everywhere he looked, and his attempts to combat these forces through conventional means proved futile in the face of a system that was rotten to its very core. This failure of traditional approaches to justice would lead him to embrace methods that were increasingly extreme and brutal. Curse's rise to prominence on Nostromo was marked by a campaign of terror that transformed the planet's criminal underworld overnight. His methods were simple but effective. He would identify the worst criminals and corrupt officials, hunt them down with supernatural skill and persistence, and execute them in ways that were designed to send a message to others who might be tempted to follow their example. His victims were found flayed, dismembered, or arranged in grotesque tableaux that served as warnings to anyone who might consider challenging his authority. The transformation of Nostromo under Curse's rule was dramatic and immediate. Crime rates plummeted as criminals either fled the planet or abandoned their illegal activities out of fear of attracting the Night Haunter's attention. Corruption among government officials disappeared as those in positions of authority realized that their actions were being watched and judged by an entity that could not be bribed, threatened, or reasoned with. For a brief period, Nostromo achieved a form of peace and order that it had not known for centuries. Yet this peace came at a terrible cost, both to the planet's population and to Curse himself. The constant exposure to violence and brutality, the need to maintain his reign of terror through ever more extreme methods, and the isolation that came from being feared rather than loved gradually eroded his sanity and his connection to his own humanity. He began to see enemies and threats everywhere, to interpret every action through the lens of suspicion and paranoia, and to respond to even minor infractions with disproportionate violence. When the Emperor arrived on Nostromo, he found a world that had achieved order through methods that violated every principle of the imperial truth and the vision of human progress that the Great Crusade was meant to achieve. The reunion between father and son was marked by tension and mutual incomprehension, the Emperor recognizing Curse's effectiveness while being deeply troubled by his methods. While Curse saw in his father's disapproval confirmation of his own belief that he was fundamentally different from and inferior to his brothers, the Night Lord's Legion under Curse's command became known throughout the Imperium, a force of terror and intimidation. Their campaigns, characterized by psychological warfare and the deliberate targeting of civilian populations to break enemy morale. They specialized in night fighting and stealth operations, using fear as their primary weapon and leaving behind scenes of carnage that served as warnings to others who might consider resisting imperial authority. Curse's relationship with his brother Primarchs was marked by mutual distrust and revulsion, his dark methods and pessimistic worldview putting him at odds with those who maintained faith in the possibility of human redemption and progress. His particular conflicts with more idealistic brothers like Sanguinius and Vulcan highlighted the fundamental philosophical differences that would eventually tear the Imperium apart. The Night Haunter's visions of the future, his ability to see the darkness and corruption that would eventually consume the Imperium, became both a source of vindication and a curse that drove him further into madness. His prophecies of the Horus Heresy and a fall of the Emperor were dismissed as the ravings of a madman. but their eventual fulfillment would prove that his dark insights into human nature were more accurate than the optimistic beliefs of his more hopeful brothers. During the Horus Heresy, Kurzi's decision to side with the rebels was driven not by any belief in Horus's cause, but by his conviction that the Imperium was doomed to fail and that its destruction was both inevitable and deserved. His campaigns during the rebellion were characterized by the same brutal methods he had always employed, but now they were directed against targets that he believed represented the hypocrisy and corruption of the imperial system itself. The Night Haunter's ultimate fate, his assassination by the Calidus assassination, was perhaps the only ending that could have provided him with the vindication he sought. His willing acceptance of death, his refusal to defend himself against an attack he had foreseen, and his final words claiming that his death proved the justice of his cause demonstrated that even in his madness, he remained committed to his twisted vision of justice and retribution. The legacy of Conrad Kurz serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of fighting monsters without becoming one yourself, of using evil methods in pursuit of good ends, and of allowing the darkness of the universe to corrupt one's soul in the name of protecting others from that same darkness. His story reminds us that the line between justice and vengeance, between necessary force and gratuitous cruelty, is often thinner than we would like to believe. Sanguinius, the great angel, stands as perhaps the most beloved and tragic of all the Primarchs, a being whose nobility and sacrifice would inspire loyalty and devotion that endures 10,000 years after his death. His story is one of perfection achieved and lost, of a hero who embodied the highest aspirations of humanity while bearing within himself the seeds of a curse that would haunt his sons for all eternity. The world of Baal, where Sanguinius's pod came to rest, was a radiation-blasted wasteland where the remnants of human civilization struggled to survive in the ruins of a once great planetary empire. The planet's surface was scarred by ancient wars and environmental disasters, its atmosphere poisoned by industrial toxins and radioactive fallout that had transformed much of the population into twisted mutants barely recognizable as human. Into this hellish environment, the infant Primarch brought hope and the promise of redemption. Unlike many of his brothers, whose superhuman nature was immediately apparent, Sanguinius possessed an additional gift that set him apart even among the Primarchs, a pair of magnificent white wings that marked him as something beyond even their enhanced existence. These wings were not merely decorative but functional, allowing him to soar through the skies of Baal like an angel of legend. The young Primarch was discovered by one of the few remaining pure-strain human tribes on Baal, the people of the pure blood, who recognized in his angelic appearance the fulfillment of ancient prophecies about a savior who would deliver them from the horrors of their poisoned world. His adoptive family and tribe provided him with love and guidance, but they also burdened him with expectations and responsibilities that would shape his entire existence. Sanguinius's early life on Baal was marked by his efforts to unite the scattered tribes of pure-strain humans and to protect them from the mutant hordes that roamed the planet's wastelands. His approach to this challenge was fundamentally different from that of many of his brothers. Rather than simply destroying his enemies, he sought to understand them, to find ways to redeem those who could be saved, and to show mercy even to those who had fallen too far into corruption to be helped. The Angel's campaigns to pacify Baal were masterpieces of both military strategy and moral leadership. He possessed an intuitive understanding of aerial warfare that allowed him to use his wings and his ability to fly as tactical advantages. But his true genius lay in his ability to inspire others to rise above their circumstances and achieve heights of nobility and courage that they had never thought possible. Under his leadership, the tribes of Baal were transformed from desperate survivors into a unified people capable of reclaiming their world from the forces of chaos and mutation. The culture that developed on Baal under Sanguinius's guidance was one that valued beauty, art, and the pursuit of perfection alongside martial prowess and tactical excellence. The Angel understood that humanity's greatest strength lay not in its capacity for violence, but in its ability to create, to love, and to sacrifice for ideals greater than individual survival. This philosophy would become the defining characteristic of both Sanguinius himself and the Blood Angels Legion that would eventually serve under his command. When the Emperor arrived on Ball, he found a world that had been transformed through the efforts of a single individual whose nobility and charisma had inspired an entire population to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and deep affection, the Emperor seeing in Sanguinius the embodiment of his highest hopes for what humanity could become, while the angel recognized in his father the ultimate source of the divine purpose that had driven him throughout his life. The Blood Angels Legion under Sanguinius's command became known throughout the Imperium, one of the most noble and effective forces in the Emperor's arsenal. They specialized in assault operations and close-quarters combat, their combination of tactical excellence and inspirational leadership making them capable of achieving victory even in the most desperate circumstances. Their Primarch's example inspired them to heights of heroism and self-sacrifice that became legendary throughout the galaxy. Sanguinius's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, his nobility and charisma earning him respect and affection even from those who might otherwise have been rivals or enemies. He possessed a unique ability to see the best in others and to inspire them to live up to their highest potential, making him a natural mediator and peacemaker among his often fractious siblings. His particular friendship with Horus would make the War Master's eventual betrayal all the more tragic and devastating. The curse that lay hidden within the Blood Angels' gene seed, the flaw that would eventually manifest as the Red Thirst and the Black Rage, was a source of constant concern and sorrow for Sanguinius. He understood that his sons carried within them a darkness that could transform them into the very monsters they fought against, and he spent much of his existence searching for ways to cure or control this affliction. His inability to find a permanent solution to this problem was perhaps his greatest failure and his deepest regret. During the Horus Heresy, Sanguinius found himself in the impossible position of having to choose between his loyalty to the Emperor and his love for his brother Horus. His decision to remain loyal to their father was not made lightly, but once made, it was absolute and unwavering. His contributions to the defense of Terra during the final stages of the rebellion were crucial, his presence on the battlefield inspiring loyalist forces to feats of heroism that seemed impossible. The Angels' final confrontation with Horus aboard the War Master's battle barge represented the climax of the entire heresy, a battle between two brothers who had once loved each other, but who now stood on opposite sides of a conflict that would determine the fate of humanity. Sanguinius's death at the hands of his corrupted brother was not just a personal tragedy, but a cosmic loss, the extinguishing of a light that had illuminated the darkness of the galaxy for all who had been privileged to witness it. The sacrifice of Sanguinius, his willingness to face certain death in order to weaken Horus and create an opportunity for the Emperor to strike the killing blow, exemplified the nobility and selflessness that had defined his entire existence. His death was not meaningless but purposeful, a final act of love and loyalty that would inspire his sons and the broader Imperium for millennia to come. The legacy of Sanguinius lives on in the Blood Angels chapter and their successors, who continue to struggle with the curse that their Primarch could never cure while striving to live up to the example of nobility and sacrifice that he set for them. His memory serves as a reminder that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there can still be heroes whose light shines bright enough to illuminate the path forward for all who would follow. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon of Medusa, represents the fusion of flesh and machine, the pursuit of perfection through the elimination of weakness, and the tragic irony of a being who sought to transcend human limitations only to fall victim to the most human of emotions. His story is one of strength and determination, of technological mastery and tactical genius, but also of inflexibility and an inability to adapt when circumstances demanded change rather than steadfast adherence to principle. The world of Medusa, where Ferrus Manus's pod came to rest, was a harsh planet of volcanic activity and seismic instability, where the very ground beneath one's feet could shift without warning and where survival required constant adaptation to changing conditions. The planet's human inhabitants had developed a culture that valued technological innovation and mechanical reliability as the keys to survival in an environment that was fundamentally hostile to organic life. The infant Primarch was discovered by one of Medusa's nomadic clans, the clan Rakan, who recognized his extraordinary nature and raised him according to their traditions of strength, endurance, and technological mastery. From his earliest years, Ferrus displayed an intuitive understanding of machinery and metallurgy that surpassed even the most skilled tech adepts of his adoptive world, his hands seeming to possess an almost supernatural ability to shape metal and create devices of incredible complexity and effectiveness. The defining moment of Ferrus Manus's early life came during his legendary battle with the great silver worm Acernath, a creature of living metal that had terrorized the clans of Medusa for generations. The young Primarch's victory over this monster was achieved not through brute force alone, but through a combination of tactical genius, technological innovation, and sheer determination that demonstrated all the qualities that would make him one of the most formidable warriors among his brothers. The aftermath of this battle saw Ferrus's hands transformed by prolonged contact with the creature's living metal skin, becoming weapons of incredible power and durability that could shape metal with the same ease that normal hands might shape clay. These silver hands became both a symbol of his strength and a constant reminder of the price that must sometimes be paid for victory, a physical manifestation of the fusion between flesh and machine that would define his entire philosophy of existence. Ferrus's rise to prominence on Medusa was marked by his efforts to unite the planet's fractious clans under a single banner. Using a combination of superior technology, tactical brilliance, and personal charisma to forge a confederation that could work together for mutual benefit. His approach to leadership was fundamentally meritocratic. He believed that strength and competence should be the only measures of worth, and he had little patience for those who relied on birth, tradition, or political maneuvering to maintain their positions. The culture that developed on Medusa under Ferrus's influence was one that valued technological innovation, physical strength, and the constant pursuit of improvement through the elimination of weakness. The Primarch preached a philosophy of self-reliance and personal responsibility, arguing that individuals and societies could only achieve their full potential by identifying and correcting their flaws, rather than making excuses or seeking external solutions to internal problems. When the Emperor arrived on Medusa, he found a world that had achieved a remarkable level of technological sophistication and social organization through the efforts of a single individual whose vision and capabilities had transformed an entire civilization. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect, the Emperor seeing in Ferrus a reflection of his own commitment to human advancement through the application of science and reason, while Ferrus recognized in his father the ultimate embodiment of the perfection he had spent his life pursuing. The Iron Hands Legion under Ferrus Manus's command became known throughout the Imperium for their technological expertise, their tactical flexibility, and their absolute refusal to accept defeat or compromise. They specialized in mechanized warfare and the use of advanced technology to achieve victory, their combination of superior equipment and rigorous training making them one of the most effective forces in the Emperor's arsenal. Ferrus's relationship with his brother Primarchs was complex and often strained by his tendency to judge others by the same harsh standards he applied to himself. He had particular respect for those brothers who shared his commitment to excellence and self-improvement, while maintaining a barely concealed contempt for those who he perceived as weak, lazy, or unwilling to make the sacrifices necessary for true achievement. His closest friendship was with Fulgrim, a relationship based on mutual respect for each other's pursuit of perfection, despite their very different approaches to achieving it. The tragedy of Ferrus Manus lay not in any fundamental flaw in his character or philosophy, but in his inability to recognize that his greatest strength, his unwavering commitment to his principles, could also become a weakness when circumstances required flexibility and adaptation. His inflexibility in the face of changing conditions, his refusal to consider that his methods might not always be the best approach, and his tendency to see compromise as weakness rather than wisdom would ultimately contribute to his downfall. During the Drop Site Massacre on Istvan V, Ferris's determination to strike immediately at the traitor forces, his refusal to wait for reinforcement or to consider the possibility of a trap, demonstrated both his courage and his fatal inability to adapt his tactics to changing circumstances. His death at the hands of his former friend Fulgrim was not just a personal tragedy, but a devastating blow to the Loyalist cause, the loss of one of their most capable commanders at a moment when his leadership was desperately needed. The legacy of Ferris Manus lives on in the Iron Hands chapter and their successors, who continue to pursue their Primarch's vision of perfection through the fusion of flesh and machine, while struggling to balance his commitment to strength and self-reliance with the need for flexibility and adaptation in an ever-changing galaxy. His example serves as both an inspiration and a warning about the dangers of allowing one's greatest strengths to become inflexible dogma. Angren, the Red Angel, represents the ultimate tragedy of potential destroyed by circumstance, a being who might have been one of the greatest heroes in human history, but who was instead transformed into an engine of mindless violence and rage. His story is one of slavery and rebellion, of brotherhood forged in blood and lost to betrayal, and of a noble soul corrupted by forces beyond his control until nothing remained but fury and the endless hunger for battle. The world of Nuceria, where Angren's pod crashed, was a planet where gladiatorial combat had become the dominant form of entertainment and social control, where slaves were forced to fight and die for the amusement of their masters, and where strength was measured not by one's achievements or character, but by one's ability to survive in the arena. Into this brutal environment, the infant Primarch was cast like a lamb among wolves, his superhuman capabilities marking him as a prize to be captured and exploited rather than a child to be nurtured and protected. The young Primarch's early years were spent in the fighting pits of Nuceria's capital city, where he was forced to battle other slaves for the entertainment of crowds who saw him as nothing more than a particularly valuable piece of property. The constant violence and dehumanization of his existence would have broken the spirit of any normal being, but Angren's superhuman resilience allowed him to not only survive, but to excel in an environment that was designed to destroy everything noble and good about those trapped within it. The defining moment of Angren's early life came with the surgical implantation of the Butcher's Nails, archaeotech devices that were designed to enhance a gladiator's aggression and pain tolerance while simultaneously destroying their capacity for complex thought and emotional connection. These devices, crude and brutal even by the standards of Nuceria's slave masters, would prove to be the source of both Angren's greatest strength and his ultimate damnation. The Butcher's Nails transformed Angren from a being capable of leadership, compassion, and strategic thinking into a creature driven by an insatiable hunger for violence and bloodshed. The devices fed on his brain's pleasure centers, providing euphoric sensations only when he was engaged in combat and causing excruciating pain during periods of peace or inactivity. This neurological conditioning created a feedback loop that gradually eroded his personality and intelligence, leaving behind only the most basic drives for survival and dominance. Despite the horrific effects of the nails, Angren managed to maintain enough of his original personality to form deep bonds with his fellow gladiators, creating a brotherhood of shared suffering and mutual protection that became the only source of meaning and purpose in his existence. These relationships, forged in the crucible of the arena and strengthened by countless battles fought side by side, represented the last vestiges of his humanity and the only thing that kept him from descending completely into mindless savagery. Angren's rise to prominence among the gladiators of Nuceria was inevitable given his superhuman capabilities. But his true achievement was not his success in the arena, but his ability to inspire his fellow slaves to dream of something beyond their current existence. His leadership of the Great Gladiator Rebellion that sought to overthrow the planet's ruling class demonstrated that even the Butcher's Nails could not completely destroy his capacity for strategic thinking and inspirational leadership. The rebellion that Angren led was doomed from the beginning, a desperate attempt by slaves armed with gladiatorial weapons to overthrow a planetary government backed by advanced technology and overwhelming numbers. Yet the courage and determination displayed by the rebels, their willingness to die for the chance to live as free beings rather than continue existing as property, represented a nobility of spirit that transcended their circumstances and demonstrated the fundamental dignity of all sentient life. The Emperor's arrival on Nuceria during the final stages of the rebellion presented him with an impossible choice: save his son and allow the rebels to be slaughtered, or intervene to save the rebels and risk losing Angren forever. His decision to teleport Angren away from the battlefield while leaving his gladiator brothers to die was perhaps the greatest mistake of his existence, an act that destroyed any possibility of a positive relationship with his son and ensured that Angren would forever view him as just another master who saw him as property rather than a person. The integration of Angren into the Great Crusade was a disaster from the beginning, his rage and resentment at being forced to abandon his brothers making it impossible for him to form positive relationships with his new legion or to embrace the Emperor's vision of human unity and progress. The World Eater's legion under his command became increasingly brutal and undisciplined, their adoption of the Butcher's Nails technology transforming them from elite warriors into berserkers who cared nothing for strategy or objectives beyond the immediate satisfaction of their hunger for violence. The tragedy of Angren's existence was compounded by his awareness of what he had lost and what he might have been. In his rare moments of clarity, when the pain from the nails temporarily subsided, he could remember the bonds of brotherhood he had shared with his fellow gladiators and the noble cause for which they had died. These memories served only to increase his rage and resentment, providing fuel for a fury that could never be satisfied because its true target, the system that had destroyed his life and murdered his brothers, was beyond his reach. Angren's relationship with his brother Primarchs was marked by mutual incomprehension and barely restrained hostility. His inability to control his rage, his contempt for what he saw as their privileged upbringings, and his conviction that they could never understand the suffering he had endured made it impossible for him to form meaningful connections with any of them. Even those brothers who attempted to reach out to him found themselves rebuffed by his assumption that their concern was either false sympathy or condescending pity. The World Eater's campaigns during the Great Crusade became increasingly problematic as Angren's influence transformed them from a disciplined military force into a horde of blood-crazed killers who showed no discrimination between enemy combatants and innocent civilians. Their victories were achieved at terrible cost, not just in terms of casualties, but in terms of the reputation and moral authority of the Imperium itself. Worlds that might have been brought into compliance through negotiation or limited military action were instead subjected to wholesale slaughter that served no strategic purpose beyond satisfying the Legion's hunger for violence. The Emperor's attempts to find a cure for the Butcher's Nails proved futile, the archaeotech devices having become so integrated with Angren's nervous system that their removal would have resulted in his immediate death. This medical reality served as a constant reminder of the irreversible nature of the damage that had been done to the Primarch, both physically and psychologically, and of the impossibility of restoring him to what he might have been under different circumstances. During the Horus Heresy, Angren's decision to join the rebellion was driven not by any belief in the War Masters, but by his desire for revenge against the Emperor, who had failed to save his gladiator brothers and who continued to use him as a weapon while refusing to acknowledge his suffering. His participation in the rebellion provided him with targets for his rage that were at least nominally connected to the source of his pain, even if they could never truly satisfy his need for vengeance. The transformation of Angren into a demon prince of Khorne represented the final destruction of whatever remained of his original personality and humanity. The ascension process completed what the Butcher's Nails had begun, erasing the last traces of the noble soul that had once inspired a slave rebellion and replacing them with nothing but an eternal hunger for blood and violence. In becoming a demon, Angren achieved a form of immortality, but it was an existence devoid of meaning, purpose, or the possibility of redemption. The legacy of Angren serves as a reminder of the terrible cost of slavery and dehumanization, of the way that systems of oppression can destroy not just individual lives, but the very potential for greatness that exists within every sentient being. His story demonstrates that even the most powerful and capable individuals can be broken by circumstances beyond their control, and that the scars left by such experiences may never fully heal. The World Eaters chapter and their successors continue to struggle with the legacy of their Primarch's fall, seeking ways to honor his memory while avoiding the path of mindless violence that ultimately consumed him. Their ongoing battle against the influence of Khorne and the Butcher's Nails serves as a testament to the possibility of redemption even in the face of seemingly insurmountable corruption, though it remains to be seen whether they can ultimately succeed where their Primarch failed. Roboute Guilliman, the Avenging Sun, stands as perhaps the most successful and influential of all the Primarchs in terms of lasting impact on the Imperium, a being whose genius for organization and administration created systems and institutions that have endured for 10,000 years. His story is one of practical wisdom triumphing over idealistic vision, of the recognition that good governance requires not just noble intentions, but effective implementation, and of a leader who understood that true greatness lies not in personal glory, but in creating something that can survive and prosper long after its creator is gone. The world of Macragge, where Guilliman's pod came to rest, was a civilized planet with a stable government and advanced technology, providing the young Primarch with an environment where his natural talents for leadership and organization could develop without the trauma and hardship that marked the early lives of many of his brothers. His adoptive father, Connor Guilliman, was a wise and benevolent ruler who recognized the boy's extraordinary capabilities and provided him with the education and guidance necessary to develop them properly. Guilliman's early life on Macragge was marked by his rapid mastery of every subject he studied, from military strategy and political theory to economics and engineering. Unlike many of his brothers whose genius was focused in specific areas, Guilliman possessed a broad intelligence that allowed him to understand the interconnections between different aspects of governance and to develop comprehensive solutions to complex problems. His approach to learning was systematic and thorough, reflecting a mind that valued understanding over mere knowledge and practical application over theoretical speculation. The young Primarch's first major test came with the assassination of his adoptive father by political rivals who sought to overthrow Macragg's government and establish a more authoritarian regime. Guilliman's response to this crisis demonstrated both his tactical genius and his commitment to justice, as he systematically identified and eliminated the conspirators while simultaneously implementing reforms that would prevent similar threats from arising in the future. The transformation of Macragge under Guilliman's leadership was comprehensive and lasting, touching every aspect of society from military organization and economic policy to education and infrastructure development. His reforms were not revolutionary in the sense of completely overturning existing systems, but they were thorough and effective, addressing root causes rather than merely treating symptoms and creating institutions that could function effectively even without his direct oversight. Guilliman's approach to governance was fundamentally pragmatic, based on the recognition that good intentions were meaningless without effective implementation, and that the best policies were those that could be sustained over time rather than those that produced immediate but temporary benefits. He understood that true leadership required not just the ability to inspire others, but the patience and attention to detail necessary to create systems that would continue to function long after the leader was gone. When the Emperor arrived on Macragge, he found a world that had achieved a level of prosperity and stability that served as a model for what the Imperium could become under proper leadership. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect, the Emperor seeing in Guilliman the kind of practical wisdom and administrative genius that would be essential to governing a galactic empire, while Guilliman recognized in his father the ultimate authority, whose vision he could help implement and refine. The Ultramarines Legion under Guilliman's command became known throughout the Imperium, the most disciplined and effective force in the Emperor's arsenal. Their success based not on individual heroics or superior technology, but on superior organization, training, and tactical doctrine. The Primarch's genius lay in his ability to analyze successful military practices from across the galaxy and synthesize them into comprehensive systems that could be taught, learned, and consistently applied by ordinary space marines. Guilliman's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, though his tendency to offer unsolicited advice and his assumption that his methods were superior to theirs sometimes created tensions. He genuinely believed that sharing his knowledge and experience would help his brothers achieve greater success, but his inability to understand that others might have valid reasons for preferring different approaches sometimes made him appear arrogant or condescending. The Thousand Sons chapter and their various splinter factions continue to struggle with the legacy of their Primarch's fall, seeking ways to use their psychic abilities in service to humanity while avoiding the path of corruption that consumed their father. Their ongoing battle against the influence of Tzeentch serves as a reminder that redemption is possible even for those who have fallen furthest from grace, though the price of such redemption may be higher than anyone is willing to pay. Horus Lupercal, the War Master, stands as the greatest tragedy in human history, a being who was meant to be the Emperor's chosen heir and the architect of humanity's golden age, but who instead became the instrument of its near destruction. His story is one of love and betrayal, of noble intentions corrupted by pride and ambition, and of the terrible truth that sometimes the greatest threats to civilization come not from external enemies, but from those who were most trusted and beloved. The world of Chthoniya, where Horus's pod came to rest, was a harsh mining world where survival required strength, cunning, and the ability to form alliances with others who shared similar goals. The planet's gang culture and constant warfare created an environment where leadership skills and tactical genius were essential for survival, providing the young Primarch with the foundation he would need to become one of the greatest military commanders in human history. Horus's early life on Chthoniya was marked by his rapid rise through the ranks of the planet's gang hierarchy, his natural charisma and tactical brilliance allowing him to unite disparate factions under his leadership and bring a measure of order to a world that had known only chaos and conflict. His approach to leadership was based on personal relationships and mutual loyalty rather than fear or intimidation, creating bonds of brotherhood that would endure long after he had left his homeworld behind. The young Primarch's genius lay not just in his ability to win battles, but in his understanding of human nature and his skill at inspiring others to achieve their full potential. He possessed an intuitive grasp of what motivated different individuals and groups, allowing him to forge alliances and build coalitions that seemed impossible to outside observers. This talent for bringing out the best in others would make him one of the most effective leaders in the Imperium, but it would also make his eventual fall all the more devastating. When the Emperor arrived on Chthoniya, he found a world that had been transformed through the efforts of a single individual whose leadership had brought peace and prosperity to a planet that had known only war and suffering. The reunion between father and son was marked by immediate recognition and deep affection, the Emperor seeing in Horus the embodiment of his highest hopes for what humanity could achieve, while Horus recognized in his father the ultimate source of the purpose and meaning he had been seeking throughout his life. Horus's integration into the Great Crusade was seamless and spectacular, his natural leadership abilities and tactical genius making him the obvious choice to serve as the Emperor's primary lieutenant and eventual successor. His appointment as War Master was not just a recognition of his military capabilities, but an acknowledgement of his unique ability to inspire loyalty and cooperation among his brother Primarchs, many of whom had difficulty working together despite their shared goals. The Luna Wolves Legion under Horus's command became known throughout the Imperium, the tip of the spear, the force that was called upon for the most challenging and important campaigns of the Great Crusade. Their success was based not just on superior tactics or equipment, but on the personal loyalty and devotion that their Primarch inspired in every member of the Legion, creating a bond between commander and troops that was stronger than any formal military hierarchy. Horus's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, his natural charisma and diplomatic skills allowing him to mediate disputes and build consensus even among the most fractious personalities. He possessed a unique ability to see the best in others and to help them work together toward common goals, making him an invaluable asset in the complex political environment of the Great Crusade. The seeds of Horus's eventual corruption were present from the beginning, though they remained hidden beneath his noble intentions and genuine desire to serve the Emperor's vision. His love for his father was so profound that it became a form of dependency. His sense of self-worth tied so closely to the Emperor's approval that any perceived rejection or abandonment would strike at the very core of his identity. The Emperor's decision to return to Terra and leave the Great Crusade in Horus's hands was intended as the ultimate expression of trust and confidence, but it was perceived by the War Master as a form of abandonment. His growing isolation from his father, combined with the increasing burden of responsibility for the Crusade's success, created a vulnerability that the forces of chaos would eventually exploit with devastating effect. The corruption of Horus began subtly, with whispers and suggestions that played upon his existing fears and insecurities rather than attempting to directly challenge his loyalty or moral convictions. The Chaos Gods understood that a being of Horus's strength and character could not be turned through crude temptation or obvious manipulation, but would have to be led astray through a careful process of psychological manipulation that exploited his greatest virtues as well as his hidden weaknesses. The pivotal moment in Horus's fall came during his near-death experience on the moon of Davin, where he was exposed to visions that showed him possible futures where the Emperor was worshipped as a god and where humanity had abandoned the secular ideals of the imperial truth. These visions, carefully crafted by the Chaos Gods to exploit his deepest fears and concerns, convinced him that the Emperor had betrayed everything they had worked to achieve and that only rebellion could save humanity from a future of religious tyranny and stagnation. The transformation of Horus from loyal son to arch-traitor was not a sudden change, but a gradual process of rationalization and self-justification that allowed him to convince himself that his rebellion was actually an act of loyalty to the true ideals of the Imperium. His ability to inspire others and build coalitions, which had made him such an effective leader during the Great Crusade, now became the tools through which he would corrupt half of his brother Primarchs and plunge the galaxy into civil war. The Horus Heresy that followed was not just a military conflict, but a fundamental challenge to the very foundations of human civilization. A war that would determine whether humanity would continue to advance toward the secular utopia envisioned by the Emperor, or would fall back into the darkness of superstition and chaos. Horus's leadership of the rebellion demonstrated both his continued tactical genius and the terrible effectiveness of corruption that comes from within rather than from external enemies. The final confrontation between Horus and the Emperor aboard the War Master's battle barge represented the climax of the entire conflict, a battle between father and son that would determine the fate of humanity itself. Horus's death at his father's hands was both a necessary victory for the forces of order and a personal tragedy that would haunt the Emperor for the rest of his existence. The legacy of Horus Lupercal serves as a reminder that even the greatest heroes can fall if they allow pride and ambition to override their better judgment, and that the greatest threats to civilization often come not from obvious enemies, but from those who are most trusted and beloved. His story demonstrates the importance of humility, self-reflection, and the recognition that good intentions are not enough to justify any action, no matter how noble the ultimate goal may seem. Lorgar Aurelian, the bearer of the word, represents the power of faith and the terrible consequences that can result when religious devotion is misdirected toward unworthy objects of worship. His story is one of a seeker after truth who found only lies, a prophet whose visions led his followers not to salvation but to damnation, and a son whose love for his father was so profound that its rejection would drive him to become his greatest enemy. The world of Colchis, where Lorgar's pod came to rest, was a planet dominated by religious conflict, where competing faiths waged endless wars over questions of doctrine and belief. The planet's culture was one that valued spiritual devotion and theological knowledge above material concerns, creating an environment where a being of Lorgar's natural charisma and religious insight could develop his talents for inspiring faith and devotion in others. Lorgar's early life on Colchis was marked by his rapid rise to prominence within the planet's religious hierarchy, his natural eloquence and apparent divine inspiration allowing him to unite the fractious faiths under a single banner of worship. His approach to religion was fundamentally inclusive, seeking to find common ground between different beliefs rather than emphasizing their differences, and his vision of universal brotherhood through shared faith would define his entire existence. The young Primarch's genius lay not in military strategy or technological innovation, but in his ability to inspire others to transcend their limitations through faith and devotion. He possessed an intuitive understanding of the human need for meaning and purpose, and his sermons and writings provided his followers with a sense of cosmic significance that transformed their lives and gave them the strength to endure any hardship. Lorgar's unification of Colchis was achieved not through conquest, but through conversion, his message of universal brotherhood and divine purpose proving more powerful than any army in bringing peace to a world that had known only religious warfare. His success demonstrated the power of ideas and beliefs to transform societies in ways that force alone could never achieve, but it also revealed the dangerous potential for religious devotion to be manipulated and misdirected. When the Emperor arrived on Colchis, he found a world that had achieved unity through the efforts of a single individual whose religious vision had inspired an entire population to abandon their sectarian conflicts and work together for common goals. The reunion between father and son was marked by Lorgar's immediate recognition of the Emperor as the divine being he had been seeking throughout his life, a perception that would prove to be both his greatest strength and his ultimate weakness. The Word-Bearers Legion under Lorgar's command became known throughout the Imperium for their absolute devotion to the Emperor and their ability to inspire conquered populations to embrace imperial rule not just as a political necessity, but as a religious calling. Their campaigns were characterized by careful attention to the spiritual and cultural needs of the populations they encountered, creating lasting loyalty rather than mere compliance. Lorgar's approach to the Great Crusade was fundamentally different from that of his brother Primarchs. His focus on conversion and indoctrination rather than simple conquest, reflecting his belief that true victory required not just military success, but the transformation of hearts and minds. His methods were slower than those of his brothers, but often more lasting, creating worlds that remained loyal to the Imperium not out of fear, but out of genuine devotion. The Emperor's rejection of Lorgar's worship and his destruction of the perfect city of Monarchia represented a devastating blow to the Primarchs' worldview and sense of purpose. The public humiliation of being forced to kneel before his father, while his greatest achievement burned around him, shattered Lorgar's faith in the imperial truth and left him searching for new objects of worship to fill the void in his soul. The pilgrimage to the Eye of Terror that followed Monarchia was intended as a journey of spiritual discovery, but it became instead a descent into corruption as Lorgar and his most trusted followers encountered the Chaos Gods and recognized them the true divine powers that ruled the universe. His conversion to chaos worship was not a betrayal of his religious nature, but its ultimate expression, as he finally found beings worthy of the absolute devotion he had always sought to give. Lorgar's role in corrupting Horus and orchestrating the events that would lead to the Horus Heresy demonstrated the terrible power of religious conviction when it is directed toward destructive ends. His ability to inspire faith and devotion, which had once been used to bring peace and unity to Colchis, now became the tool through which he would plunge the galaxy into civil war and damn countless souls to eternal torment. The Word-Bearers' campaigns during the Heresy were characterized by their focus on corruption and conversion rather than simple military victory, their goal being not just to defeat the Loyalist forces, but to transform them into servants of the Dark Gods. Lorgar's understanding of human psychology and his skill at manipulation made him one of the most dangerous enemies the Imperium faced, as his influence could turn even the most loyal servants of the Emperor into willing agents of chaos. The aftermath of the heresy saw Lorgar retreating into the Eye of Terror, where he continued his theological studies and his efforts to spread the worship of chaos throughout the galaxy. His transformation into a demon prince represented the culmination of his spiritual journey, the final step in his evolution from a seeker after truth to a servant of the very forces that sought to destroy all truth and meaning in the universe. The development of the Codex Astartes represented the culmination of Guilliman's military genius, a comprehensive manual of space marine organization, tactics, and doctrine that distilled centuries of experience into a format that could be studied and applied by future generations. The Codex was not intended to be a rigid set of rules that stifled creativity and adaptation, but rather a foundation of proven principles that could be modified and expanded as circumstances required. During the Horus Heresy, Guilliman's distance from Terra during the initial stages of the rebellion meant that he was unable to participate in the defense of the Imperial Palace, a fact that would haunt him for the rest of his existence. His efforts to organize the Imperium Secundus as a backup government in case Terra fell demonstrated both his practical wisdom and his unwavering loyalty to the Emperor's vision, even when that vision seemed doomed to failure. The aftermath of the heresy saw Guilliman playing a crucial role in the reorganization of the Imperium, his administrative genius proving essential to the task of rebuilding a civilization that had been shattered by civil war. His implementation of the Codex Astartes and the division of the Space Marine legions into smaller chapters was controversial but necessary, reflecting his understanding that the concentration of power that had made the Great Crusade possible had also made the heresy inevitable. Guilliman's apparent death during the battle with his brother Fulgrim and his subsequent preservation in stasis represented a tragic loss for the Imperium, depriving it of its most capable administrator at a time when effective governance was desperately needed. His eventual resurrection during the events of the Gathering Storm marked a turning point in Imperial history, providing the struggling Imperium with the leadership it needed to face the challenges of the 41st millennium. The legacy of Robert Guilliman extends far beyond his military achievements or his role in the Great Crusade, encompassing the fundamental structures and institutions that have allowed the Imperium to survive for 10,000 years despite countless threats and challenges. His example demonstrates that true greatness lies not in personal glory or individual achievement, but in the creation of systems and institutions that can endure and adapt long after their creator is gone. Mortarion, the Death Lord, embodies the grim determination and bitter endurance that characterizes humanity's struggle for survival in a hostile universe. A being whose hatred of tyrants and oppressors was so profound that it ultimately led him to become the very thing he had spent his life fighting against. His story is one of liberation and enslavement, of noble intentions corrupted by pride and desperation, and of the terrible irony that sometimes the greatest enemies of freedom are those who claim to fight for it. The world of Barbarous, where Mortarion's pod came to rest, was a death world shrouded in toxic mists and ruled by alien overlords who had enslaved the human population for their own twisted purposes. The planet's atmosphere was poisoned by industrial pollutants and alchemical experiments, creating an environment where only the strongest and most adaptable could survive. The human inhabitants lived in the valleys and lowlands, their lives constantly threatened by the toxic fog that descended from the mountains where their alien masters dwelt. The infant Primarch was discovered not by humans, but by one of the alien overlords, a being known as Nekari, who recognized the child's potential and decided to raise him as a weapon against his own species. This twisted upbringing, surrounded by the very creatures he would later dedicate his life to destroying, shaped Mortarion's understanding of power, oppression, and the lengths to which tyrants would go to maintain their control over others. Mortarion's early years were spent learning the arts of war and survival from beings who viewed him as nothing more than a useful tool. Their teachings focused on making him strong enough to serve their purposes while ensuring that he remained dependent on their knowledge and resources. The young Primarch's natural resistance to toxins and poisons made him uniquely suited to survive in Barbarous's hostile environment, but his alien foster father's control over the most deadly areas of the planet meant that his freedom was always limited and conditional. The turning point in Mortarion's life came with his growing awareness of the suffering of Barbarous's human population and his recognition that his alien masters were not the benevolent rulers they claimed to be, but but parasites who fed on the misery and desperation of their subjects. This realization sparked a rebellion within him that would define the rest of his existence, a determination to free not just himself, but all of humanity from the tyranny of those who would exploit and oppress them. Mortarion's escape from his alien foster father's control was achieved through a combination of careful planning, superior knowledge of barbarous terrain, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. His descent into the valleys where the human population lived marked the beginning of a campaign of liberation that would transform him from a weapon of oppression into a champion of the oppressed. The young Primarch's efforts to organize the humans of Barbarous into an effective resistance first demonstrated his natural leadership abilities and his understanding of both military strategy and human psychology. He recognized that defeating the alien overlords would require not just superior tactics and weapons, but also the kind of unity and determination that could only come from a shared commitment to freedom and justice. Mortarion's campaigns against the alien rulers of Barbarous were characterized by a methodical approach that reflected both his tactical genius and his deep understanding of his enemy's strengths and weaknesses. He developed specialized equipment and techniques for fighting in the planet's toxic environment, created training programs that prepared his followers for the unique challenges they would face, and established supply lines and communication networks that allowed his forces to operate effectively across the planet's hostile terrain. The liberation of Barbarous was achieved through a combination of military victory and popular uprising, as Mortarion's example inspired the planet's human population to rise up against their oppressors and reclaim their world. The final battle against Nekari, his alien foster father, was both a personal confrontation and a symbolic victory over the forces of tyranny and oppression that had plagued humanity throughout its history. When the Emperor arrived on Barbarous, he found a world that had been transformed through the efforts of a single individual whose hatred of tyranny and commitment to freedom had inspired an entire population to overthrow their oppressors. The reunion between father and son was complicated by Mortarion's suspicion of authority figures and his concern that the Emperor might prove to be just another tyrant seeking to exploit humanity for his own purposes. The Death Guard Legion under Mortarion's command became known throughout the Imperium for their endurance, their resistance to hostile environments, and their ability to achieve victory through sheer determination and refusal to accept defeat. They specialized in warfare in toxic and hostile environments, their training and equipment allowing them to fight effectively in conditions that would incapacitate or kill ordinary soldiers. Mortarion's relationship with his brother Primarchs was marked by his suspicion of those who had been raised in privileged circumstances and his belief that they could never truly understand the suffering of ordinary people or the true cost of freedom. His particular animosity toward those brothers who embraced psychic powers reflected his deep-seated hatred of anything that reminded him of the alien sorcerers who had once ruled Barbarous. The Primarch's growing disillusionment with the Emperor and the Imperium was fueled by his perception that the Great Crusade was simply replacing one form of tyranny with another, that the Emperor's vision of human unity was being achieved through the same methods of conquest and oppression that he had spent his life fighting against. His concerns about the use of psychers and the Emperor's secretive nature reinforced his belief that the Imperium was becoming the very thing it claimed to oppose. During the Horus Heresy, Mortarion's decision to join the rebellion was driven by his conviction that the Emperor had betrayed the ideals of freedom and justice that the Great Crusade was supposed to represent. His transformation into a demon prince of Nurgle represented the ultimate corruption of his noble intentions, as his hatred of tyranny was twisted into service to one of the greatest tyrants in the universe. The legacy of Mortarion serves as a warning about the dangers of allowing hatred and suspicion to override judgment and wisdom, of the way that noble intentions can be corrupted when they are not tempered by humility and self-reflection. His fall demonstrates that even the most dedicated champions of freedom can become agents of oppression when they lose sight of the principles they claim to serve. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, represents the pursuit of knowledge and understanding taken to its ultimate extreme, a being whose thirst for wisdom and mastery of the arcane arts led him down a path that would ultimately damn not just himself, but his entire legion. His story is one of good intentions and terrible consequences, of the hubris that comes from believing that knowledge alone can solve any problem, and of the tragic irony that sometimes the greatest threats to humanity come from those who seek to protect it. The world of Prospero, where Magnus's pod came to rest, was a planet dedicated to learning and the pursuit of knowledge, where vast libraries and centers of study had been built to preserve to expand human understanding of the universe. The planet's culture valued intellectual achievement above all else, creating an environment where a being of Magnus's extraordinary psychic abilities could develop his talents without fear of persecution or misunderstanding. Magnus's early life on Prospero was marked by his rapid mastery of every form of knowledge available to him, from the physical sciences and mathematics to the most esoteric forms of psychic manipulation and warpcraft. His adoptive father, Amun, was a scholar and psyker who recognized the boy's extraordinary gifts and provided him with the guidance and training necessary to develop them safely and effectively. The young Primarch's approach to learning was characterized by an insatiable curiosity and a refusal to accept that any knowledge was forbidden or too dangerous to pursue. He believed that understanding was the key to solving any problem and that ignorance was the greatest enemy of progress and enlightenment. This philosophy would guide his entire existence and ultimately lead to his downfall. Magnus's relationship with the warp was fundamentally different from that of other psykers, his extraordinary power allowing him to perceive and interact with entities and forces that existed beyond the normal boundaries of reality. He believed that these beings were simply another form of life to be studied and understood, failing to recognize that many of them were predators who viewed human souls as nothing more than food or playthings. The Primarch's first major encounter with the forces of chaos came during his attempts to save Prospero from a plague of psychic mutations that threatened to destroy the planet's population. His bargain with the entity that would later be revealed as Tzeentch, the chaos god of change and sorcery, seemed like a reasonable exchange at the time, knowledge and power in return for the salvation of his people. Magnus could not have known that this agreement would bind him and his sons to the service of one of the most manipulative and dangerous beings in the universe. When the Emperor arrived on Prospero, he found a world that had achieved remarkable advances in psychic development and the understanding of warp phenomena, but he also recognized the terrible dangers that his son's research had unleashed. The reunion between father and son was marked by both pride and concern, the Emperor seeing in Magnus a reflection of his own pursuit of knowledge while recognizing that his son's methods were leading him toward damnation. The Thousand Sons Legion under Magnus's command became known throughout the Imperium for their mastery of psychic powers and their ability to achieve victory through the application of arcane knowledge rather than brute force. They were scholars as much as warriors, their approach to warfare characterized by careful study of their enemies and the application of precisely targeted psychic attacks that could cripple entire armies without firing a single shot. Magnus's relationship with his brother Primarchs was complicated by their fear and misunderstanding of his psychic abilities, many of them viewing his powers as dangerous and unnatural. His particular conflict with Lemon Russ reflected a fundamental philosophical divide about the proper limits of human knowledge and the dangers of delving too deeply into mysteries that were beyond mortal comprehension. The Council of Nicaea, where the Emperor ruled on the use of psychic powers within the legions, represented a devastating blow to Magnus and his vision of humanity's psychic evolution. The prohibition against the use of sorcery and the disbanding of the librarius programs seemed to him like a rejection of everything he had worked to achieve, a triumph of ignorance and superstition over reason and enlightenment. Magnus's decision to continue his psychic research in defiance of the Emperor's edict was driven by his conviction that his work was too important to abandon and his belief that he could prove the value of his studies through practical results. His discovery of Horus's corruption and his attempt to warn the Emperor through psychic means demonstrated both his loyalty and his tragic inability to understand the consequences of his actions. The psychic message that Magnus sent to warn the Emperor about Horus's treachery was intended as an act of loyalty and service. But its transmission required such massive amounts of warp energy that it shattered the psychic barriers protecting Terra and allowed demonic forces to invade the Imperial Palace. This catastrophic failure of good intentions provided the Emperor with the justification he needed to order Magnus's arrest and the destruction of Prospero. The burning of Prospero by Lemon Rust and the Space Wolves represented the destruction of everything that Magnus had worked to build and the vindication of his worst fears about the Imperium's attitude toward knowledge and learning. The sight of his libraries burning and his sons being slaughtered drove him to make the final bargain with Tzeentch that would transform him into a demon prince and damn his legion to eternal service to chaos. Magnus's transformation into a demon prince was not just a personal tragedy, but a cosmic disaster, as one of the most knowledgeable and powerful beings in the galaxy was corrupted into a servant of the very forces he had once sought to understand and control. His fall demonstrated the terrible truth that knowledge without wisdom is not just useless, but actively dangerous, and that the pursuit of understanding must be tempered by humility and respect for the limits of mortal comprehension. The legacy of Magnus the Red serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the hubris that comes from believing that any price is worth paying for knowledge. His story reminds us that good intentions are not enough to justify dangerous actions, and that sometimes the greatest service one can perform is to accept the limitations that have been placed upon us rather than seeking to transcend them at any cost. The legacy of Lorgar Aurelian serves as a warning about the dangers of uncritical faith and the importance of questioning the objects of our devotion. His story demonstrates that religious conviction, no matter how sincere or well-intentioned, can become a force for evil when it is not tempered by reason and moral judgment, and that the greatest threats to civilization often come from those who claim to act in the name of higher powers. The Word Bearers chapter and their various splinter factions continue to spread the worship of chaos throughout the galaxy, their missionary zeal and theological sophistication making them one of the most persistent and dangerous threats to imperial stability. Their ongoing efforts to corrupt and convert serve as a reminder that the battle for the soul of humanity is never truly won, and that eternal vigilance is the price of preserving the values and beliefs that make civilization possible. Vulcan, the Promethean Lord, embodies the virtues of compassion, craftsmanship, and self-sacrifice that represent the best aspects of human nature. A being whose commitment to protecting the innocent and creating, rather than destroying, made him perhaps the most beloved of all the Primarchs. His story is one of a warrior who never lost sight of his humanity, a leader who understood that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down, and a craftsman whose greatest works were not weapons of war but tools of peace and prosperity. The world of Nocturne, where Vulcan's pod came to rest, was a volcanic death world where survival required not just physical strength, but also cooperation, ingenuity, and an absolute commitment to protecting one's community from the constant threats posed by the planet's hostile environment. The planet's inhabitants had developed a culture that valued craftsmanship, mutual aid, and the protection of the weak, creating an environment where a being of Vulcan's compassionate nature could develop his talents for both creation and protection. Vulcan's early life on Nocturne was marked by his adoption into a community of blacksmiths and artisans who recognized his extraordinary gifts and provided him with the training and guidance necessary to develop them properly. His foster father, Bel, was a master craftsman who taught the young Primarch not just the technical skills of metalworking and engineering, but also the philosophical principles that should guide the use of such abilities. The young Primarch's approach to craftsmanship was characterized by an obsessive attention to detail and a refusal to accept anything less than perfection in his work. He understood that the quality of a tool or weapon could mean the difference between life and death for those who depended on it, and he took personal responsibility for ensuring that everything he created would serve its intended purpose flawlessly. This commitment to excellence would define his entire existence and influence every aspect of his leadership. Vulcan's rise to prominence on Nocturne was achieved not through conquest or political maneuvering, but through his demonstrated ability to protect his community and improve their lives through his craftsmanship and leadership. His innovations in metallurgy and engineering transformed Nocturne's technology, while his personal courage and tactical genius made him the natural choice to lead the planet's defense against the various threats that constantly menaced its population. The culture that developed on Nocturne under Vulcan's influence was one that valued creation over destruction, cooperation over competition, and the protection of the innocent over personal glory. The Primarch's example inspired his followers to see themselves not as conquerors or warriors, but as guardians and builders, whose primary responsibility was to create a better world for future generations. When the Emperor arrived on Nocturne, he found a world that had achieved remarkable technological advancement and social cohesion through the efforts of a single individual whose vision and capabilities had transformed an entire civilization. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect, the Emperor seeing in Vulcan the embodiment of the protective and nurturing aspects of his own nature, while Vulcan recognized in his father the ultimate source of the purpose and meaning he had been seeking throughout his life. The Salamander's Legion under Vulcan's command became known throughout the Imperium for their compassion towards civilian populations, their mastery of flame-based weapons and tactics, and their absolute refusal to abandon their comrades or retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. They specialized in close-quarters combat and the use of specialized equipment that reflected their Primarch's genius for craftsmanship and engineering. Vulcan's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, his compassionate nature and genuine concern for others earning him respect and affection even from those who might otherwise have been rivals or enemies. He possessed a unique ability to see the humanity in others and to inspire them to live up to their highest potential, making him a natural mediator and peacemaker among his often fractious siblings. The Primarch's commitment to protecting innocent life sometimes put him at odds with the broader strategic objectives of the Great Crusade. His refusal to accept civilian casualties or to use tactics that might harm non-combatants, creating tensions with commanders who prioritized efficiency over humanitarian concerns. His insistence that the means used to achieve victory were as important as the victory itself reflected a moral clarity that was both admirable and sometimes impractical. Vulcan's mastery of craftsmanship extended beyond mere technical skill to encompass an understanding of the symbolic and spiritual significance of creation. His artifacts were not just tools or weapons, but works of art that embodied the values and aspirations of their creators, serving as reminders of what humanity could achieve when it dedicated itself to building rather than destroying. During the drop site massacre on Istvan V, Vulcan's apparent death was a devastating blow to the Loyalist cause, depriving them of one of their most capable commanders and most inspiring leaders at a moment when such leadership was desperately needed. His subsequent resurrection and the revelation of his perpetual nature demonstrated that even death could not extinguish the flame of hope and compassion that he represented. The mystery surrounding Vulcan's disappearance and his promise to return when humanity's need was greatest has become one of the most enduring legends of the Imperium, providing hope and inspiration to countless generations who have faced seemingly impossible odds. His example serves as a reminder that true heroism lies not in personal glory or individual achievement, but in the willingness to sacrifice oneself for the protection and betterment of others. The Salamanders chapter and their successors continue to embody the values that their Primarch exemplified. Their commitment to protecting civilian populations and their mastery of craftsmanship, making them one of the most respected and beloved forces in the Imperium. Their ongoing search for Vulcan's artifacts and their preparation for his eventual return serve as a testament to the enduring power of hope and faith in the face of adversity. The legacy of Vulcan serves as a reminder that strength without compassion is mere brutality, that creation is more valuable than destruction, and that the true measure of a leader is not how many enemies they can defeat, but how many lives they can protect and improve. His story demonstrates that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there can still be heroes whose light shines bright enough to illuminate the path forward for all who would follow. Corvus Corax, the Deliverer, represents the spirit of liberation and the righteous fury of the oppressed rising up against their oppressors, a being whose commitment to freedom and justice made him one of the most effective guerrilla commanders in human history. His story is one of a slave who became a liberator, a shadow who brought light to the darkest corners of the galaxy, and a warrior whose greatest victories were achieved not through overwhelming force, but through cunning, stealth, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. The world of Deliverance, originally known as Lycaeus, where Corax's pod came to rest, was a moon that had been transformed into a massive prison and mining complex by a corrupt techno-aristocracy that used slave labor to extract valuable minerals from the moon's core. The population was divided into two distinct classes: the ruling elite who lived in luxury in the moon's upper levels, and the enslaved masses who toiled in darkness and misery in the depths below. The infant Primarch was discovered by a group of escaped slaves who recognized his extraordinary nature and raised him according to their values of freedom, equality, and resistance to oppression. His early life was spent in the deepest tunnels and caverns of Lycaeus, where he learned the arts of stealth, sabotage, and guerrilla warfare from those who had dedicated their lives to fighting against and seemingly impossible odds. Corax's development was shaped by constant exposure to the suffering of the enslaved population and the casual cruelty of their oppressors, creating a worldview that was fundamentally committed to justice and the liberation of the oppressed. His natural abilities for stealth and infiltration were enhanced by his deep understanding of the psychology of both predator and prey, allowing him to move unseen through enemy territory and strike at targets that others considered unreachable. The young Primarch's rise to leadership among the slave population was achieved through a combination of tactical genius, personal charisma, and an absolute commitment to the cause of liberation that inspired others to follow him even when victory seemed impossible. His approach to resistance was methodical and patient, building networks of support and gathering intelligence before striking at carefully selected targets that would maximize damage to the oppressor while minimizing risk to his followers. Corax's campaign to liberate Lycaeus was a masterpiece of guerrilla warfare, utilizing hit-and-run tactics, sabotage, and psychological warfare to gradually erode the power and confidence of the ruling elite while building the strength and morale of the resistance movement. His ability to appear where he was least expected and disappear before his enemies could respond earned him a reputation as a phantom or ghost, a figure of legend who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The liberation of Lycaeus was achieved not through a single decisive battle, but through a series of carefully coordinated strikes that systematically dismantled the infrastructure of oppression while inspiring the enslaved population to rise up and claim their freedom. Corax's understanding of both military strategy and political organization allowed him to not just defeat his enemies, but to create the foundations for a new society based on principles of freedom and equality. When the Emperor arrived on the newly renamed Deliverance, he found a world that had been transformed through the efforts of a single individual whose commitment to justice and liberation had inspired an entire population to overthrow their oppressors and create a new form of government based on democratic principles. The reunion between father and son was marked by mutual recognition and respect, the Emperor seeing in Corax a reflection of his own commitment to human freedom and dignity. The Raven Guard Legion under Corax's command became known throughout the Imperium for their mastery of stealth and infiltration tactics. Their ability to strike at enemy weak points with surgical precision, and their absolute commitment to protecting civilian populations from the horrors of war. They specialized in reconnaissance, sabotage, and rapid assault operations that could achieve strategic objectives with minimal collateral damage. Corax's relationship with his brother Primarchs was generally positive, though his tendency toward independence and his preference for operating outside normal command structures sometimes created tensions with those who favored more conventional approaches to warfare. His particular respect for those brothers who shared his commitment to protecting the innocent and his suspicion of those who seemed willing to accept civilian casualties reflected his fundamental moral convictions. The Primarch's approach to warfare was characterized by careful planning, meticulous intelligence gathering, and the use of precisely targeted strikes that could achieve maximum effect with minimum risk to his own forces. He understood that the goal of military action should be the achievement of political objectives rather than the simple destruction of enemy forces, and his campaigns were notable for their efficiency and their minimal impact on civilian populations. During the Drob Site massacre on Istvan V, the near destruction of the Raven Guard was a devastating blow to both Corax personally and the Loyalists generally. The loss of so many of his sons in what was essentially a trap orchestrated by his traitorous brothers filled him with a rage and determination that would drive his actions throughout the rest of the heresy. Corax's subsequent efforts to rebuild his legion through the use of accelerated gene seed implantation and genetic manipulation demonstrated both his desperation to contribute to the war effort and his willingness to take extreme risks in pursuit of victory. The failure of these experiments and the corruption of many of his new recruits into twisted monsters was perhaps the greatest tragedy of his existence, forcing him to personally execute the very sons he had tried so hard to create. The aftermath of the heresy saw Corax struggling to come to terms with his failures and the losses his legion had suffered. His guilt and self-recrimination driving him to increasingly desperate measures in his ongoing war against the forces of chaos. His eventual disappearance into the Eye of Terror in pursuit of the traitorous word-bearers represented both a quest for vengeance and a form of self-imposed exile from a galaxy that he felt he had failed to protect. The legacy of Corvus Corax serves as a reminder that freedom is never free, that justice requires constant vigilance and sacrifice, and that sometimes the greatest victories are achieved not through overwhelming force, but through patience, cunning, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. His example continues to inspire those who fight against oppression and tyranny, demonstrating that even the smallest force can achieve great things when it is guided by righteous purpose and unwavering determination. The Raven Guard chapter and their successors continue to embody the values that their Primarch exemplified, their mastery of stealth and infiltration tactics making them invaluable assets in the Imperium's ongoing struggle against its enemies. Their commitment to protecting the innocent and their preference for precision over brute force serve as a testament to the enduring relevance of Corax's teachings and example. Alpheus Omegon, the Hydra, represents the ultimate expression of secrecy, deception, and the manipulation of information as weapons of war, beings whose true nature and ultimate loyalties remain mysteries that may never be fully understood. Their story is one of twins who shared a single identity, operatives whose methods were so complex and convoluted that even their allies could never be certain of their true intentions, and warriors whose greatest victories may have been achieved through apparent defeats. The circumstances surrounding the discovery and early life of Alpheus Omegon remain shrouded in mystery and contradiction, with multiple conflicting accounts that may all be true, all be false, or represent different aspects of a truth too complex for simple understanding. What is certain is that they were the last of the Primarchs to be reunited with the Emperor, and that their integration into the Great Crusade was marked by secrecy and misdirection from the very beginning. The Alpha Legion under their command became known throughout the Imperium as masters of infiltration, misdirection, and unconventional warfare. Their methods so secretive and their organization so compartmentalized that even other Imperial forces were never entirely certain of their true capabilities or objectives. They specialized in operations that required subtlety and precision rather than brute force, achieving their goals through manipulation and deception rather than direct confrontation. The philosophy that guided Alpheus Omegon and their legion was based on the principle that information was the most powerful weapon in any conflict, and that victory could be achieved through the careful manipulation of intelligence and the exploitation of enemy weaknesses rather than through superior firepower or numbers. Their approach to warfare was fundamentally different from that of their brother Primarchs, emphasizing adaptability and flexibility over rigid adherence to doctrine. The Alpha Legion's campaigns during the Great Crusade were notable for their efficiency and their minimal casualties, their ability to achieve compliance through infiltration and subversion, often making large-scale military action unnecessary. Their methods were sometimes criticized by other legions as underhanded or dishonorable, but their results spoke for themselves in terms of worlds brought into compliance with minimal bloodshed. The relationship between Alpharius Olmegan and their brother Primarchs was complicated by the secretive nature of their operations and their tendency to operate independently of normal command structures. Their ability to appear and disappear without warning, their use of multiple identities and cover stories, and their apparent ability to be in multiple places at once made them valuable allies, but also sources of suspicion and unease. The decision of Alpharius Olmegan to join Horus's rebellion remains one of the most controversial and poorly understood aspects of the Horus Heresy, with evidence suggesting that their true loyalties may have been far more complex than simple allegiance to either the Emperor or the War Master. Their actions during the heresy often seem to serve multiple purposes simultaneously, advancing the cause of the rebellion while also undermining it in subtle ways that would only become apparent much later. The Alpha Legion's campaigns during the heresy were characterized by their complexity and their apparent contradictions, with operations that seemed to serve the interests of chaos while also protecting Imperial assets and personnel. Their ability to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, pursuing different objectives with different cells of their organization, made it impossible for either side to fully trust or understand their true intentions. The apparent death of Alpharius during the battle with Rogel Dorn on Pluto was typical of the mysteries that surrounded the Alpha Legion, with evidence suggesting that the being who died may not have been the true Primarch, but rather one of many operatives who had been surgically altered to serve as body doubles. The survival of Olmegan and the continued operations of the Alpha Legion demonstrated that their organization was designed to function even without its apparent leadership. The post-heresy activities of the Alpha Legion have continued to confound Imperial intelligence services, with their operations seeming to serve multiple masters and pursue objectives that often appear contradictory or incomprehensible. Their ability to infiltrate other organizations, their use of sleeper agents and long-term deep cover operations, and their apparent ability to manipulate events from behind the scenes have made them one of the most persistent and dangerous threats to Imperial security. The legacy of Alpharius Olmegan serves as a reminder that truth is often more complex than it appears, that loyalty and betrayal are not always clearly defined concepts, and that the most dangerous enemies are often those whose true nature and intentions remain hidden. Their story demonstrates the power of information and deception as weapons of war, but also the dangers of methods that are so complex and secretive that they may ultimately serve no master but chaos itself. The Alpha Legion and their various splinter factions continue to operate throughout the galaxy, their true objectives and loyalties remaining as mysterious as ever. Their ongoing activities serve as a constant reminder that in the grim darkness of the far future, nothing is ever as simple as it appears, and that the greatest threats may come from those who claim to be allies rather than from obvious enemies. The mystery of Alpharius Olmegan represents the ultimate expression of the principle that knowledge is power, but also demonstrates the dangers of secrecy taken to such extremes that it becomes an end in itself rather than a means to achieve greater objectives. Their story serves as both an inspiration and a warning about the seductive power of hidden knowledge and the importance of maintaining clear moral principles even when operating in the shadows. The Lost and the Damned represent perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Primarch project. To beings whose very existence has been erased from Imperial records and whose fates serve as a reminder that even the Emperor's greatest creations were not immune to failure and corruption. The 2nd and 11th Primarchs, known only by their numerical designations, have become the subject of whispered speculation and forbidden inquiry. Their stories lost to official censorship, but preserved in fragments of rumor and half-remembered accounts that hint at disasters so terrible that even the memory of them had to be purged from history. The circumstances surrounding the disappearance of the 2nd and 11th Legions remain one of the most closely guarded secrets in Imperial history, with even the surviving Primarchs maintaining a conspiracy of silence that has endured for 10,000 years. What little evidence remains suggests that their fates were so catastrophic and their failures so complete that the Emperor himself ordered their complete erasure from all records. Their gene seed destroyed, their achievements forgotten, and their very names struck from the annals of history. The few references that survive in the most ancient and heavily censored documents speak of expeditions that went too far, of discoveries that should never have been made, and of corruption that spread so quickly and completely that only the most extreme measures could prevent it from consuming the entire Imperium. Some accounts suggest that one or both of the Lost Primarchs fell to chaos corruption even before the Horus Heresy, their downfall serving as a warning of the dangers that would later claim half of their brothers. Other fragmentary evidence points to the possibility that the Lost Primarchs discovered something in the depths of space that challenged the very foundations of the Imperial truth. Knowledge so dangerous that its mere existence threatened to undermine everything the Emperor had worked to achieve. The suggestion that they may have encountered evidence of the true nature of the Chaos Gods, or perhaps made contact with other entities of comparable power and malevolence, raises questions about what other horrors may lurk in the unexplored regions of the galaxy. The reaction of the surviving Primarchs to any mention of their lost brothers reveals the depth of the trauma that their disappearance caused, with even the most forthright and honest among them refusing to speak of what they witnessed or participated in. The fact that warriors who had faced every conceivable horror without flinching would not discuss the fate of the 2nd and 11th suggests that whatever happened to them was beyond even their considerable capacity to endure or understand. The practical consequences of the Lost Legion's disappearance were significant, with their Space Marines being distributed among the remaining legions and their equipment and resources redistributed to support the continuing Great Crusade. This process of absorption and redistribution was carried out with such thoroughness that no trace of their original identity or allegiance remained, their warriors becoming indistinguishable from their new brothers and their unique cultures and traditions lost forever. The psychological impact of the Lost Primarchs' fate on their surviving brothers cannot be underestimated, serving as a constant reminder that even beings of their power and status were not immune to failure, and that the Emperor's love and protection had limits that could be exceeded. The knowledge that 2 of their number had fallen so completely that their very existence had to be erased created an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty that would influence the relationships between the remaining Primarchs throughout the rest of their existence. The Emperor's decision to erase all record of the Lost Primarchs represents one of the most controversial and morally ambiguous actions of his reign, raising questions about the nature of truth, the value of historical memory, and the lengths to which a leader should go to protect his followers from dangerous knowledge. The fact that even he, with all his power and wisdom, felt compelled to resort to such extreme measures suggests that the threat posed by whatever the Lost Primarchs had become or discovered was truly existential in nature. The legacy of the Lost and the Damned serves as a reminder that knowledge can be a burden as well as a blessing, that some truths are too dangerous to be preserved, and that even the greatest heroes can fall so far that their very memory becomes a source of corruption and despair. Their story, or rather the absence of their story, demonstrates the importance of humility and caution when dealing with forces beyond mortal comprehension. The ongoing speculation about the fate of the 2nd and 11th Primarchs has become a source of both fascination and fear within the Imperium, with some viewing their erasure as a necessary sacrifice to protect humanity from knowledge that could destroy it, while others see it as an act of tyrannical censorship that deprives humanity of important lessons about the dangers they face. The truth, whatever it may be, remains locked away in the deepest vaults of Imperial secrecy, known only to the Emperor himself and perhaps a handful of his most trusted servants. The mystery of the Lost Primarch serves as a constant reminder that the universe contains horrors and dangers that even the most powerful beings cannot safely confront, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is the willingness to forget rather than to remember. Their absence from the historical record speaks more loudly than any chronicle of their achievements could, serving as a warning about the price of hubris and the importance of recognizing the limits of mortal understanding. legacy, and the modern Imperium. The story of the Primarchs extends far beyond their individual achievements and failures during the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, encompassing a legacy that has shaped every aspect of Imperial civilization for 10,000 years. Their influence can be seen not just in the Space Marine chapters that carry on their genetic heritage and tactical doctrines, but in the fundamental structures of Imperial government, military organization, and cultural identity that continue to define humanity's struggle for survival in the 41st millennium. The Codex Astartes, written by Robert Guilliman in the aftermath of the heresy, represents perhaps the most enduring and influential legacy of the Primarchs, providing a framework for Space Marine organization and tactics that has guided the Imperium's elite forces for millennia. The division of the original legions into smaller chapters was not just a military reform, but a fundamental restructuring of imperial power that sought to prevent any single individual from wielding the kind of influence that had made the heresy possible. The gene seed of the loyal Primarchs continues to be the foundation upon which new generations of Space Marines are created, their genetic legacy living on in the enhanced warriors who serve as humanity's ultimate defenders. Each chapter carries within its members not just the physical characteristics of their Primarch, but also aspects of his personality, tactical preferences, and moral outlook, creating a diversity of approaches and capabilities that has proven essential to the Imperium's survival. The cultural impact of the Primarchs extends beyond the Space Marines to encompass the broader Imperial population, with their stories serving as sources of inspiration, moral guidance, and cautionary tales that help define what it means to be human in a universe that offers little hope or comfort. The legends of Sanguinius's sacrifice, Vulcan's compassion, and Corax's liberation continue to inspire ordinary citizens to acts of heroism and self-sacrifice that echo their Primarch's greatest achievements. The return of Robert Guilliman during the events of the Gathering Storm has demonstrated that the age of the Primarchs is not entirely past, and that these legendary figures may yet have roles to play in humanity's future. His resurrection and assumption of the role of Lord Commander of the Imperium has brought new hope to a civilization that had grown accustomed to decline and stagnation, proving that even in the darkest times, heroes can return to guide humanity toward a better future. The ongoing search for the missing loyal Primarchs, Lion L. Johnson, Lemon Russ, Vulcan, Jagat White Khan, and Corvus Corax, continues to drive exploration and military campaigns throughout the galaxy, as the Imperium seeks to reunite with the lost sons of the Emperor who may hold the keys to humanity's salvation. Their potential return represents both hope and uncertainty, as their experiences during their long absence may have changed them in ways that could prove either beneficial or dangerous to the Imperium they once served. The traitor Primarchs who ascended to demon princehood continued to pose existential threats to Imperial civilization, their corruption and power making them among the most dangerous enemies humanity faces. Their ongoing campaigns from within the Eye of Terror, that other warp storms, serve as constant reminders of the price of failure and the importance of maintaining vigilance against the corrupting influence of chaos. The lessons learned from the Primarchs' successes and failures continue to inform Imperial doctrine and policy, with their examples serving as both inspiration and warning for current and future leaders. The importance of loyalty, the dangers of pride and ambition, the value of compassion and sacrifice, and the need for constant vigilance against corruption are themes that echo through Imperial culture and continue to shape the decisions of those who hold power. The Space Marine chapters that trace their lineage to the loyal Primarchs continue to embody their genetic fathers' values and methods, serving as living monuments to their memory and continuing their work of protecting humanity from the countless threats that surround it. Each chapter's unique culture and traditions reflect aspects of their Primarch's personality and philosophy, creating a diversity of approaches that has proven essential to the Imperium's ability to adapt and survive in an ever-changing galaxy. The study of the Primarchs and their legacies remains one of the most important fields of Imperial scholarship, with historians, theologians, and military theorists continuing to analyze their achievements and failures in search of insights that might help guide humanity through the challenges of the present and future. Their stories serve as both historical record and moral instruction, providing examples of both the heights of heroism and the depths of corruption that human nature is capable of achieving. The ultimate legacy of the Primarchs lies not in their individual achievements or failures, but in their demonstration of the potential that exists within humanity itself. They were created to be perfect, but their imperfections and struggles made them more human than their creator perhaps intended. Their stories remind us that greatness is not about being without flaw, but about striving to overcome our limitations and serve something greater than ourselves, even when the cost of such service is everything we hold dear. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the memory of the Primarchs serves as a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who fight in humanity's name. Their legacy lives on not just in the gene seed of the Space Marines or the pages of the Codex Astartes, but in the hearts and minds of every human being who refuses to surrender to despair and continues to fight for a better tomorrow. They were the Emperor's greatest creation and his most tragic failure, but above all, they were human, and in their humanity lies both the source of their power and the key to understanding what it truly means to be the inheritors of the stars. The saga of the 20 Primarchs stands as the greatest story ever told in the annals of human history, a tale of gods and monsters, heroes and villains, triumph and tragedy that encompasses the full spectrum of human experience and emotion. Their legacy will endure as long as humanity itself survives, serving as both inspiration and warning for all who would follow in their footsteps and seek to shape the destiny of our species among the stars.